Welcome to The Tired Thinker, where curiosity prowls through the fog and questions leave faint footprints behind. Tonight's mystery belongs to the world of detective puzzles, the strange pleasure of not knowing yet reaching anyway. The locked room, the missing motive, the clue that hides in plain sight. Each asks, when truth is pieced together, was it always there? And what if the detective's own mind? If every theory changes, if every lead collapses, is the seeker still certain or just chasing the ghost of certainty? These aren't riddles to solve quickly, but rooms to wander through quietly, to feel the hum of deduction and the gentle tension between logic and wonder. So tonight, we'll follow the clues slowly, no rush, no easy endings, just the awareness that mystery itself is the pulse of thinking. Before we begin, where are you listening from? What hour ticks in your small, watchful corner of the world? If this space keeps your mind wandering kindly, I'd be grateful if you liked or subscribed, so more curious minds can find their way here. Now, let's begin. The room was still, the kind of stillness that doesn't just fill space, but weighs on it. A ceiling fan turned slowly, cutting through stale air that smelled faintly of coffee and time. Nothing moved, yet everything seemed to wait. This was where it began, or maybe where something ended. A detective steps in, not a genius or a hero, just a person used to looking too closely. They pause, listening to the quiet, not for a sound, but for what isn't there. A whisper of a clue is not noise, it's absence, a missing object, a misplaced glance, a word that didn't need to be said. Most people rush through silence. They fill it with talk or with their own assumptions. But a detective learns to sit inside it, to let it speak. Every case has a rhythm, and when something breaks that rhythm, the silence hums with meaning. They walk the room. A coffee cup sits on the table. There's a ring of moisture beneath it, too fresh for a scene that's supposed to have been empty for hours. The spoon is on the wrong side of the cup, a left-handed habit. The suspect said they were right-handed. No alarms, no blood, no drama. Just a whisper. But whispers, when you listen, turn into confessions. That's the heart of every detective puzzle. It isn't about intellect alone. It's about patience. The willingness to let small things become large by giving them attention. Every clue starts as something ordinary. What makes it extraordinary is context, how it sits beside everything else. Imagine two footprints, one large, one small, both head toward the door. That means two people left, right? Not always. Maybe one person left twice, once early, once late. Maybe someone retraced their own steps to hide the truth. The facts don't speak until someone listens carefully enough to hear what they're really saying. In puzzles, as in life, the loudest truths often hide behind quiet details. You can't force them out. You wait, you look, you notice. Detective work is less about solving and more about understanding. It's not a race to a revelation, but a slow uncovering of alignment, where each detail finally fits, like a lock clicking open. It's tempting to call this instinct, but instinct is only trained attention, the kind that notices the smallest fiber stuck to a chair leg, or the faint mark on the floor that means a rug was moved not long ago. When silence surrounds you, even the air changes weight. There's tension in what isn't said. In interviews, suspects talk, they tell stories, and in every story, something leans too far in one direction. You hear it when someone says, "I think," too often, or when they avoid using a name. Language becomes a map, and what they skip over marks the terrain you need to search. Detectives listen with both ears. One for the words, one for the gaps. Consider this. A note is found on a desk, written in careful cursive. It says, "Don't worry, everything's fine." Most people would take comfort in that. A detective sees something else. The word "fine" is written twice, the first crossed out. That means hesitation, maybe fear, maybe deceit. The ink is darker on one word than the others, maybe written later or with a heavier hand. Each mark tells a truth that the sentence hides. This kind of seeing isn't natural, it's learned. You train your attention like a muscle. At first, the world feels too loud to notice details. You see the whole, not the parts. But over time, the noise quiets. You start to see the threads that hold everything together. Take a city street at night. Neon signs flicker, footsteps echo, traffic murmurs, chaos. Yet somewhere in that noise, a sound is off. A car idling too long, a door closing where there shouldn't be one. A detective turns toward that whisper, and the entire world rearranges around it. In a puzzle, this is the moment of awareness. Not the ending, but the point when you realize the pieces were never random. They were always meant to lead here. There's beauty in that kind of attention, not just for solving crimes or puzzles, but for understanding people. Everyone leaves traces, not just fingerprints or receipts, but emotional clues. The way someone hesitates before answering, the tone they use when they say it doesn't matter, the eyes that stay fixed on a single point to avoid looking where it hurts. Listening deeply, really listening, is a form of investigation too. You can apply the same principles of detective puzzles to ordinary life. Every disagreement has a missing clue. Every misunderstanding hides a small, overlooked fact. When you look past the noise, you start to see the patterns that explain why people act the way they do. It's not about accusation. It's about empathy sharpened into clarity. The detective's calm doesn't come from detachment. It comes from discipline. You don't rush to conclusions, because the moment you do, you stop seeing what's really there. Confirmation blinds faster than darkness. In every good mystery, there's a moment when the detective seems lost. The clues contradict each other, motives blur, but that's where the whispering clue often waits. It's the one detail that refuses to fit, and because it doesn't fit, it's real. The clue that whispers is usually the one that everyone else ignored. Let's say the crime scene shows signs of a struggle. Furniture overturned, glass broken. The victim's watch stopped at 10:37. Everyone assumes that's the time of the attack. But look closer. The watch isn't broken, it's just out of battery. It stopped days before. The chaos was staged to match the wrong timeline. A whispering clue, small and patient, waited in plain sight. The detective smiles, not because the mystery is solved, but because the silence is speaking again. Every piece of evidence has a texture. A fingerprint feels different from a confession. A memory sounds different from a fact. The best detectives know how to weigh these textures against each other, to build truth layer by layer. It's not a dramatic process, it's methodical, a kind of quiet craftsmanship. Even emotion can be a clue. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that leaks through when someone tries too hard to stay calm. A steady hand holding a cup that trembles just slightly at the rim. a rehearsed story told one beat too quickly. These are not errors. They are truths revealing themselves through the smallest openings. Silence is never empty. It holds echoes, intentions, and choices. The detective doesn't fill it with noise. They let it breathe until it tells them what it's hiding. The whispering clue isn't always physical. Sometimes it's psychological. The way one person's story contradicts their own body language, or how a decision makes no sense except under hidden pressure. The detective studies these contradictions like cracks in glass. You don't look at the reflection, you trace the fracture. There's an elegance to this work. The puzzle isn't about catching someone. It's about understanding what people do when they think no one is watching. The human mind is a crime scene of its own. Motives, guilt, and self-protection all tangled together. The detective's role is to separate truth from noise without judgment. When the pieces fall into place, it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like quiet recognition. The world realigns. The silence becomes peace again. The whispering clue doesn't shout the answer. It just reminds you that truth, no matter how small, is patient. It waits in the corner of the frame, in the dust, in the space between words. It doesn't need to be discovered. It only needs someone calm enough to listen. And that's the paradox. In a world full of noise and drama, the loudest truth remains the quietest thing in the room. Every case begins with a question. Not what happened, but why. Motive is the map that makes sense of everything else. It's the pulse under the skin of a mystery. Without it, facts scatter like leaves in the wind. You can collect them, label them, even line them up. But until you know why, the story refuses to hold. A detective learns early that reason doesn't always behave. People lie for logic that crumbles when daylight hits it. Others act without reason at all, driven by impulses they can't name. When motive disappears, truth grows shy. It hides, not because it's clever, but because it has nowhere else to go. Picture a quiet street at dawn. A bakery still smells of sugar and smoke. A man lies behind the counter, dead of a single wound. The registers untouched, the doors locked from inside. No robbery, no forced entry, no clear reason. The detectives on scene look at one another, each thinking the same word, motive. When there's none, the air grows heavy. The case becomes fog instead of form. They start with what's visible: a cracked phone, a photo of a child taped to the wall, a receipt for bread baked hours earlier. None of these explain why. The forensics will tell how. The timeline will tell when. But why remains a ghost. Every investigator knows that motive, when missing, is the key that turns backward. You find it by unmaking the world around it. The baker's neighbors say he was kind. He loaned bread to those who couldn't pay. He worked alone. But kindness can be a blade if it cuts too close to someone else's pride. Maybe he forgave a debt one person didn't want forgiven. Maybe he knew something that looked harmless but wasn't. The detective doesn't assume. They let silence stretch. They ask simple questions. They watch how faces move. They wait for something to twitch when truth tries to stay still. The missing motive often hides in plain sight, under gestures that look ordinary. A case from years ago comes to mind. A woman poisons her husband. The evidence is solid. Bottle, residue, fingerprints. The jury wants to hear the motive. The prosecutor says jealousy, money, resentment. But the woman says none of those. She says she loved him. For a while, everyone laughs. It sounds absurd. Yet when the detective goes back through the reports, he finds letters between them. They show tenderness, not rage. The husband was dying already. The motive wasn't hatred, It was mercy, a warped kind of care. The vanishing motive didn't vanish at all. It only changed its shape. That's the trouble with reason. It fades under emotion's weight. In puzzles, we look for logic, but in people, logic bends. A clue without motive is a shell without a heartbeat. It looks solid, but it doesn't live. That's why a good detective doesn't just collect evidence. They listen for intent. The faint trail of meaning that lingers after reason is gone. Some crimes are driven by necessity, others by chaos, some by love twisted into control. When motive vanishes, it doesn't mean there was none. It means it's buried deeper, beneath fear or shame. Truth hides when it feels unsafe. It builds its own disguise, made from what people think others want to hear. Imagine a conversation in an interview room. A suspect sits with folded hands. The detective sits opposite, calm, patient. The suspect says they don't remember. They say it over and over. But memory doesn't vanish, it retreats. The detective doesn't press harder. They shift the topic, talk about something small, something harmless, a pet, a hobby, a favorite street vendor. Then, without warning, the truth slips out in a word, a glance, a tone. The motive doesn't return in full, but it stirs, half awake. That's the work, coaxing reason out of hiding, not by force, but by quiet persistence. When motive vanishes, it takes honesty with it. Witnesses start filling the gap with guesses. A man dies in a locked room, must be jealousy. A business partner disappears, must be greed. But guesses are dangerous. They build false scaffolds around emptiness. The detective resists the urge to fill the space. They let the silence remain, raw and open, because somewhere in that stillness, the truth breathes. Not all motives are grand. Some are small, so small they feel insulting to logic. People kill over insults, misunderstandings, fear of embarrassment. A man steals from his best friend, not because he's cruel, but because he's desperate and ashamed. The tragedy of human motive is that it rarely makes sense outside the moment it happens. The vanishing motive is what keeps the detective awake. It's not frustration, it's curiosity sharpened by respect. The world hides things for reasons. Understanding that reason means seeing the world as it is, not as we wish it were. Every puzzle has a point where facts stop speaking and intuition starts listening. That's when a detective remembers the simple rule: find what doesn't belong. A key in the wrong pocket, a gesture that doesn't match the story. Motive hides in those cracks. It's the pattern beneath the noise. There's a case often told in police training. A house fire kills a man. Investigators find traces of gasoline. Arson, they say. Insurance fraud, maybe. But no policy exists, no debts. Then one officer notices something. The fire started in the kitchen, not near valuables. A stove, recently repaired, sits too clean, as if wiped after use. The man had been cooking late. Something simple. Tea, perhaps. A kettle is found in the sink, spotless. In the end, they find no arsonist. The man had set the fire himself, not to die, but to be found. He'd wanted someone to come. The motive wasn't greed or anger. It was loneliness. That's the vanishing motive in its purest form. Not missing, but misunderstood. When reason fades, truth doesn't disappear. It changes language. It speaks through what's left behind. Scenes too neat, words too careful, faces too calm. A detective's task is not to chase it, but to wait until the silence breaks on its own. The human heart is not logical. It wants things it cannot explain. That's why motive slips through the fingers like dust. The more you grab at it, the faster it falls away. You have to let it rest, to observe without judgment, until the pattern reappears. A good detective knows that when a case feels senseless, it's often closest to being solved. The mind resists nonsense. It craves reason. But the truth, when it hides, is almost always built from the simplest thing: a need to be seen, to be safe, to be forgiven. A vanishing motive is not the absence of reason. It's the presence of pain, wearing the mask of silence. And that silence waits, steady and patient, for someone to listen long enough to understand what it's been trying to say all along. Evidence doesn't lie. That's what they say in every training room, every courtroom, every police procedural ever written. But anyone who's worked long enough in the field knows that evidence also doesn't speak clearly. It whispers. It repeats. It tells two stories at once, one of what happened and one of what someone wanted you to believe happened. The space between those two stories is where the truth hides. A detective learns to listen for the echo. It's not the mark on the floor, or the fingerprint on the glass, or the shoe print in the mud. It's what those things say about fear, control, or panic. Facts are clean, fear is not. When the two overlap, the echo starts. Take a simple scene, a living room at night, a lamp knocked over, a broken picture frame, a spilled drink near the couch. The initial report calls it a robbery, forced entry through the back door, drawer contents scattered. The evidence supports it, until you look closer. The drawers are pulled out neatly, not dumped. The broken glass is swept into one corner. The drink wasn't spilled during a struggle. It was set down carefully afterward. The scene isn't chaos, it's performance. Someone wanted the story of fear to appear louder than the truth of what happened. That's what echoes in the evidence means. The physical facts and the emotional residue never match perfectly. A seasoned investigator reads both. One tells you the event, the other tells you the motive. In training, they teach you how to collect, photograph, and label evidence. Chain of custody, contamination control. These are the mechanics, but the real skill isn't technical, it's interpretive. You have to see what's missing, what's overdone, what's out of rhythm. The human touch always leaves distortion, even when someone tries to hide it. Fear bends intention, the way heat bends light. Imagine a suspect who wipes down a weapon before hiding it. They think they've erased the link, but in doing so, they've added another kind of trace, a behavioral one. The act of cleaning tells you something about their state of mind. It tells you they were thinking, not reacting. They had time, composure, maybe guilt. The fact is the clean handle. The fear is the need to clean it. A detective learns to balance these two readings, fact and fear, without confusing them. Facts can be measured. Fear has to be felt. You can't rely on instinct alone, but you can't dismiss it either. You stand in the middle, where both stories overlap. That's where the truth usually stands waiting, quiet and steady. There was a case years ago, small and unremarkable on paper. A break-in at a tailor's shop, cash gone, some fabric rolls missing, no witnesses. The security camera caught nothing useful. At first, it looked like routine theft. But when the detective examined the footage frame by frame, something stood out. The thief didn't go for the register first. They walked straight to a shelf in the back. They knew exactly where they were going. Later, the tailor admitted he'd fired an apprentice 2 weeks earlier. The apprentice had a key copy. The theft wasn't about money, it was about insult. The cash taken afterward was an echo, not a motive. A gesture made to hide emotion behind the illusion of logic. Every clue has that echo if you look for it. A footprint pressed too deep might mean weight, or it might mean hesitation, a person pausing, heart racing, second-guessing the next step. A message written in haste might show fear, but a message rewritten shows control. You can't read evidence like text. You have to feel its rhythm. In interviews, it's the same. A suspect's story is evidence too. Words are physical things. They have shape, pacing, and pattern. When someone tells the truth, the story moves forward. When someone lies, it loops back. It replays. That's the echo again, the nervous need to reinforce what isn't real. I was there, but I didn't see anything. They'll say it twice, maybe 3 times. Each repetition is a crack in the structure. You don't have to accuse them. You just let the silence stretch, and the echo collapses on its own. One detective used to say, "Facts are the bones. Fear is the blood." It's crude but accurate. The skeleton of a story can stand on evidence, but without the emotional current running through it, you can't see the full shape of what happened. People act out of feeling first, reason second. The evidence they leave behind reflects both layers. Even victims leave echoes. A broken lock can show forced entry, but it can also show trust betrayed. A diary can be proof of motive, or it can be a confession of loneliness. Detectives aren't just collectors of facts, they're translators of emotion written in physical form. There's a danger in this work, though. You can fall too far into empathy and start seeing emotion everywhere. Not every irregularity is fear. Not every detail is symbolic. The best investigators learn restraint. They test their interpretations against the facts. If the emotional reading doesn't align with the physical one, they pull back. The echo can mislead as easily as it can reveal. Still, the echoes matter. They remind you that behind every fingerprint is a pulse. Behind every staged scene is a person who panicked, who hoped to be believed, who feared being seen. That duality is what keeps detective puzzles alive long after the facts have settled. In one unsolved case file, a note remains as evidence. It reads, "I couldn't stop it." The handwriting is steady, the ink evenly distributed. A professional might call it inconclusive, no clear proof of who wrote it or why. But the detective who found it wrote a single comment in the margin. No tremor, no tears, planned. It's not science, it's experience. Reading emotion out of structure. The fact says one thing, the fear says another. Even in forensic science, echoes appear. Blood spatter tells about direction and force, but it also tells about distance, hesitation, speed. A drop's arc can reveal a change of heart mid-action. That moment when a hand slowed, reconsidered, then followed through. Fact and fear, side by side, frozen in red geometry. The deeper truth of evidence is that it's never pure. It carries fingerprints, not just of the event, but of everyone who's touched it afterward. The collector, the analyst, the jury, the mind interpreting it. Each adds their own echo. A detective's job isn't to silence them, but to listen carefully enough to separate one from another. In the end, the evidence always talks twice, once to tell you what happened, once to remind you what it felt like. A good detective listens to both voices, the one that measures and the one that trembles. And somewhere between them, in that quiet hum of overlap, the truth waits, steady and small, until someone finally hears it for what it is. Every detective understands the frustration of a locked room mystery. A crime occurs in a space that no one can enter or leave. No windows, no footprints, no signs of force. Logic says it's impossible. Yet something happened there. The puzzle becomes not just about evidence, but about the limits of what we can see. The human mind works the same way. It builds rooms, locks them tight, and leaves a mystery behind the door. Most people think of memory as an open archive. We believe we can look back whenever we want, pull out a file, and see the truth. But memory doesn't work like that. It edits, censors, rearranges. It hides things we're not ready to see. The locked room of the mind isn't sealed by accident. It's built from protection. The mind locks away pain, shame, and unfinished questions, then convinces us the door never existed. A detective knows to distrust what looks clean. A perfectly ordered scene often means something has been hidden. The same principle applies when you investigate your own thoughts. When every answer comes too easily, when the story makes perfect sense, that's when you should pause. The truth might be sitting behind the wall you've painted over. Imagine someone sitting in a cafe, staring at their phone, pretending to read messages that never came. They say they don't care about the argument they had the night before. They say they've moved on, but inside, something keeps knocking from behind the door. The words left unsaid, the feeling of being misunderstood. They lock it away because they don't want to feel weak, but the lock doesn't silence the noise, it only muffles it. Detectives face this kind of silence every day. Witnesses forget, suspects deny, victims withdraw. You can't force open a locked door. You wait, you earn trust, you ask questions that seem harmless until the pattern shifts and something small slips through. A pause too long, a detail repeated, a word that doesn't belong. That's when the door starts to crack. The mind's locked room follows the same rule. When you start to notice the small inconsistencies in your own story, you're close to the truth. You might tell yourself you're angry when you're really hurt. You might insist you don't care because caring feels dangerous. Each of those deflections is a lock, turned tight. The mind protects itself the same way a suspect protects a secret. Think of a real locked room case. A man is found dead in his study. The door is bolted from inside, the windows sealed. At first glance, it looks like suicide. The gun lies near his hand, but the detective notices something off. The chair is pushed back too far, and the angle of the wound doesn't match the weapon's position. Slowly, the truth emerges. Someone planned the scene to look impossible. They created a story to hide what really happened. The locked door wasn't meant to protect the man. It was meant to protect the lie. Our minds can stage scenes the same way. We reconstruct events to make them easier to live with. We invent motives for other people that excuse our pain. We say, they didn't mean it, or it just happened, when the truth feels too heavy. We tidy the crime scene of our own emotions so no one, not even ourselves, will suspect there's something buried there. A detective approaches a case with patience. They know the lock exists for a reason. Break it too soon and you risk losing what's inside. The same patience is needed when you turn inward. You can't interrogate your way into self-understanding. You have to sit quietly with the contradictions until they start to talk. The mind opens its doors slowly, and only when it feels safe. Some people carry their locked rooms for years. They don't forget what's inside, they just build new rooms around it. Work, relationships, routines. Each layer adds another lock, but the clues always remain. Anxiety without cause, anger out of proportion, restlessness at night. These are the fingerprints on the doorknob, the evidence that something waits to be found. In detective work, the hardest cases aren't the violent ones. They're the ones that don't want to be solved. The same is true for the self. The mystery of the mind isn't about missing facts. It's about missing willingness. You have to want to see what's behind the door. That's the difference between forgetting and hiding. Forgetting is passive. Hiding is a choice. A detective might walk through a scene for the 10th time, tracing every step, every object. Nothing changes, but one day, something clicks. The picture frame that never gathered dust. The window latch turned the wrong way. The single thread caught on a nail. The smallest thing opens the lock. The same happens in the mind. A single thought, a memory overheard in conversation, a familiar smell, something shifts, and the past begins to breathe again. When that happens, the instinct is to shut the door fast, to relock the room and pretend you never saw inside. But the detective knows that once the lock turns, the story changes forever. You can't go back to not knowing. The mind resists the truth, but it also craves it. The energy spent maintaining silence always outweighs the cost of facing what's there. The hardest mystery isn't the one left unsolved by others. It's the one we refuse to solve for ourselves. The evidence waits quietly, a pattern in our choices, a repeated mistake, a fear we can't name. Every locked room holds a clue, and every clue points to something human, something we wanted to protect, even from ourselves. To investigate that mystery isn't an act of force, it's an act of listening. You don't need to kick down the door. You need to stand in front of it long enough to hear the sound coming from the other side. Only then do you begin to understand that what you've locked away isn't a threat at all. It's a part of you waiting to be found. A crime scene doesn't last long. Rain falls, wind shifts, time moves. Footprints blur, scents fade, memories bend. Yet even when every visible mark disappears, something always stays behind. It isn't the object or the trace. It's the pattern, the quiet design left by intention. You might not see it with the eye, but you can feel it if you pay attention. A detective walks into a scene long after the moment has passed. The dust on the floor tells more than the people in the room. A chair sits slightly off-center. A stack of papers leans instead of lies flat. The window latch faces inward when it should face out. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but small things line up in a way that says someone made choices. Those choices form a map. That map is the only way to reach the truth. Evidence always lives in stages. The physical trail fades first, the prints, the fibers, the stains. Then the emotional trail weakens. People forget how they felt. They rewrite their own memories until they sound cleaner. But intention endures. It's not something you can erase. Even when the act is over, the reason for it hangs in the air. Like dust, it settles where it's least expected, catching light only when the right angle finds it. Take a simple example, a stolen watch. The thief leaves no fingerprints, no sign of entry, no witnesses. Weeks later, a detective spots the same watch in a pawn shop. The owner says a stranger sold it. No name given. The serial number matches, but that's not what solves the case. What matters is how the watch was placed on the counter. It was set face down, the strap still fastened. Someone who stole for money would show the face to prove its worth. Someone who stole for memory would hide it. The pattern in that small act says everything. That's how intention works. It leaks into behavior even when the person doesn't notice. You can fake evidence, but you can't fake purpose. Every motion has weight. Every choice leaves residue. The detective's job isn't just to find the facts. It's to recognize which facts belong to the truth and which were laid there to mislead. There was a case once, an old farmhouse fire. The owner claimed an accident. The insurance report agreed, but one investigator saw something odd. The burn marks on the walls curved upward in clean lines. Natural fires crawl unevenly. Accelerants burn in straight arcs. The owner had poured gasoline to make it look accidental. When questioned, he confessed. He hadn't wanted money. He wanted to erase a part of his past that lived in that house. The pattern was clear. Destruction wasn't the goal. Release was. Dust itself tells stories. In forensics, dust analysis can show how often a place is disturbed. Layers reveal timelines. A clean surface between older dust means recent movement. But there's a deeper layer too, the metaphorical kind. People cover up what they can't bear to look at. Secrets gather like dust in corners. When you disturb them, they rise and catch the light, showing outlines of what's been forgotten. The pattern matters more than the particles. You see this in everyday life. A person avoids a certain street for years. Another keeps the same object on their desk long after it stops working. Someone else keeps apologizing for things no one remembers. These are patterns in the dust of the mind. They point to events that once mattered deeply, even if the details are gone. Intention leaves tracks long after memory fades. Detectives rely on what they call behavioral evidence. It's not what was done, it's how it was done. If a burglar ransacks a room but leaves jewelry untouched, you learn something about what they wanted. If a note is left at a scene, you read not just the words, but the pressure of the pen, the pauses between lines. Each movement is a thought made visible. Even when a person tries to hide, their pattern betrays them. The same rule applies to the self. We like to think we act with full awareness, but most of what we do follows invisible lines drawn by past choices. You can see it in the way people repeat certain mistakes or gravitate toward familiar pain. They sweep away the past, but never notice the shape left behind. The dust reforms the same outlines over and over. Recognizing those outlines is a kind of detective work too, an internal investigation into why we keep doing what we do. A veteran detective once said that the hardest thing to learn is when to stop looking for new clues and start listening to the pattern of the old ones. When the trail fades, the pattern becomes the only guide. You read it like music, pauses, rhythm, return. You stop asking what happened and start asking what was meant to happen. That shift changes everything. You stop chasing movement and start tracing motive. You see that behind every event, no matter how small, lies the intention to feel something. Control, forgiveness, recognition, freedom. When people lie, they lie about facts, not feelings. The pattern always gives them away. Every scene eventually becomes dust. Every trail erases itself. But before it disappears, it draws a faint design that tells the story of why someone acted. Detectives know how to find it. They don't look for what's bright or new. They look for what lingers, what resists being forgotten. The dust on a windowsill, the dent on a desk, the tone of a final word spoken too quickly. All of it forms a shape that outlasts evidence. You can sweep the floor, wash the walls, rewrite the report, but the outline of intention remains, patient as air, waiting for someone calm enough to notice that even in silence, the pattern is still there. A lie doesn't always arrive with noise. It rarely looks sharp or dangerous. Most of the time, it smells pleasant. It wears perfume, smiles politely, and says exactly what you expect to hear. That's why it works. Lies don't fight the truth head-on. They surround it. They make the air so comfortable that you stop questioning what you're breathing in. A detective learns this early. The first story you hear at a scene is almost never the truth. It's the one shaped to sound reasonable. The cleaner the story, the more cautious you become. People polish their lies the way they polish silver. They shine them until reflection replaces depth. A confession that arrives too quickly, an alibi that fits too neatly, a voice that stays too calm, each carries the scent of something rehearsed. Think of an interview room. The suspect sits straight, hands folded, answering every question with perfect precision. No hesitation, no confusion. They maintain eye contact. They smile when appropriate. They say, "I understand." The untrained listener might take comfort in that. The experienced one feels unease. Truth is rarely tidy. Real memory wanders. Real emotion stumbles. When everything smells too clean, something's been scrubbed. Lies are sensory. They appeal to how we want the world to feel. That's why scent is the right metaphor. You can't see it, but you know when it's there. It lingers even after the source is gone. In conversation, lies leave traces like perfume on fabric. A word that repeats too often. A pause before a simple answer. A compliment that lands one shade too heavy. You can't prove these things immediately, but they signal where to start looking. There was a case once involving a missing necklace. The housekeeper said she hadn't seen it in weeks. Her tone was calm, polite. almost casual. She helped the detective search drawers and shelves, offering tea as she spoke. Her words were smooth, her behavior perfect, but something didn't fit. The faint scent of polish near the dresser, stronger than the rest of the room. The detective leaned closer. Inside the polish tin, beneath the cloth, the necklace sat wrapped in tissue. The lie had been gentle, almost kind, but it carried its own perfume. People often hide guilt under the fragrance of helpfulness. That's the paradox of deceit. It wants to be liked. A lie tries to please its audience. It speaks in the tone you prefer. It mimics sincerity. A detective doesn't fight that instinct. They use it. They allow the lie to keep talking until its scent becomes overpowering. Every detail added to sound more believable is one more chance for the truth to slip through the cracks. In interrogation, this pattern shows clearly. The guilty talk to control the air. They build small clouds of language, hoping to distract. They apologize before being accused. They offer facts no one asked for. They try to perfume the silence so it won't feel dangerous. The innocent, by contrast, often speak less. They're confused, uncertain, even clumsy. Their words come raw. That rawness is the smell of truth. It doesn't need perfume. Politeness plays its part too. It's one of the most common disguises for dishonesty. People use manners as armor. They hide behind soft tones and formal gestures to avoid confrontation. You see it in business meetings, in family dinners, in witness statements. A person says, "I didn't want to bother anyone," when they mean, "I was afraid." They say, "I'm fine," when they mean, "I'm not." Society rewards politeness, so the lie feels natural. But when everyone's too polite, real honesty suffocates. Detectives often rely on what's called baseline behavior. They study how someone acts when relaxed, then watch for small shifts. A sudden change in tone, a nervous swallow, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. These are tiny leaks of truth through the polite facade. The lie can control words, but not physiology. Fear and guilt have a scent too. Salt and sweat, dryness in the mouth, a faint tremor in breath. Even perfume can't cover that for long. The scent of a lie isn't only in others, it lives in us too. People lie to themselves more often than they lie to anyone else. They say they're happy, they say they've moved on, they say they don't mind. The words sound smooth, even kind, but underneath is the faint odor of denial. The self knows when it's covering up something sharp. You can mask it for a while, but sooner or later, the air thickens. The truth begins to seep through the cracks. A detective approaching a scene knows that politeness has its uses. It opens doors, earns trust, but it also hides the pulse of the moment. A witness who smiles too often might be concealing fear. A neighbor who insists they saw nothing may have seen too much. The trick is not to confront them, but to wait. Let the scent linger. Lies grow impatient. They over-explain. They fill silence with unnecessary detail. In that effort to maintain their fragrance, they reveal the odor of intent. There's a story of an old detective who solved a case not through evidence, but through atmosphere. A murder had taken place in a small apartment. The prime suspect, a friend of the victim, was calm, cooperative, even warm. She offered the detective coffee, spoke kindly of the deceased, and expressed deep sorrow. But when the detective opened a window, a faint smell of bleach drifted in. The suspect froze. It wasn't the scent that gave her away. It was her reaction to it. The truth had been buried under layers of civility, but one whiff of what was real broke the surface. That's the way with lies. They hide behind what smells safe. They thrive in comfort. But comfort is not proof, and manners are not honesty. A skilled observer doesn't chase noise. they follow the scent. They know that when something feels too pleasant, too composed, too polite, it's time to breathe in deeper. Somewhere beneath the fragrance, the truth is waiting, sharp, unperfumed, and unmistakably real. Every detective begins a case believing they're the one doing the solving. You gather facts, trace motives, follow trails. You think the story belongs to someone else, the victim, the suspect, the witness. But every now and then, a case shifts. The trail circles back. The questions stop being about who did it and start being about why you need to know. Some mysteries don't end because their real subject was never the crime. It was you. There's an old saying in police work: you don't investigate a case, it investigates you. That sounds dramatic until you've lived it. Spend enough time staring into the choices of others, and you start to see your own reflection. The lies you excuse, the fears you hide, the lines you swore you'd never cross, they all show up in the evidence. You think you're looking at someone else's motives, but what you're really studying is the architecture of your own. Take a detective who's built a career on solving domestic cases, missing spouses, quiet betrayals, families gone wrong. He's good at it, too good. He can read tension from the way someone stirs sugar into coffee. He knows when affection is masking contempt. But one day, he realizes that every case he takes ends with the same theme. Love turned sour, trust broken, silence spreading between people who once understood each other. He's not chasing variety, he's chasing repetition. The cases are mirrors. They let him study his own failed marriage without naming it. The case isn't what's being solved, he is. It happens in smaller ways too. A rookie officer might get assigned to a theft and find themselves drawn to the suspect, not in sympathy, but in recognition. The thief says they didn't mean to, they just needed to feel control for a moment. The rookie knows that feeling. It's what made them join the force, the need to hold chaos still. If only for a second. The difference between law and crime is thinner than it looks when you see what drives both. Investigating others demands distance. You can't let emotion cloud your reading of a scene. But total distance is a myth. Every question you ask filters through who you are. You decide what matters, what's worth pursuing, what feels right, and in that decision, the case shapes you. It shows what you believe about justice, mercy, guilt, and redemption. The work writes your moral code in pencil, erasing and rewriting it every time you face a new contradiction. There was a cold case, a woman missing for 15 years. No body, no confession, only a small collection of photographs and a diary full of half-finished sentences. The detective assigned to it became obsessed. He spent nights in the station, reading the same notes, looking for something he'd missed. The woman's words were vague, but her tone was familiar. Quiet, apologetic, worn thin by exhaustion. One night, reading by the yellow light of his desk lamp, he realized why it felt familiar. His own daughter had written that way once, in a letter she never sent. The detective hadn't lost a daughter, she'd simply drifted away, too tired to reach out anymore. The missing woman's voice gave shape to what he'd ignored at home. When the case finally closed, no one celebrated. It hadn't solved a crime. It had solved a blindness. This is what happens when a case turns its glass around. You think you're searching for a culprit, but the evidence starts pointing inward. The questions you ask others echo back. What do I avoid seeing? What am I afraid to admit? Why do I need the answer so badly? A mystery becomes personal when it begins to reveal your own contradictions. You can't leave the scene unchanged. Even the tools of the trade reflect this. A magnifying glass is meant to enlarge details, to bring clarity. But when you hold it at the wrong angle, it reflects your eye. The act of looking becomes the thing looked at. The more intently you study others, the clearer your own outline becomes. The case teaches you how you think, what you believe in, and what you're willing to overlook when the truth cuts close. In the field, this can be dangerous. A detective too entangled in a case loses judgment. Empathy turns into projection, but it can also be clarifying. When you see yourself in the evidence, you start to understand your own limits. You stop pretending to be objective and start being honest instead. Objectivity was never real. Awareness is. Every investigator carries ghosts from past cases, not just unsolved crimes, but unresolved feelings, the anger that doesn't fade, the compassion that arrived too late. Those ghosts become part of the next investigation. You bring them with you, uninvited but present, shaping how you read the next scene. Some call it instinct, others call it bias. Maybe it's both. The key is noticing when a case is no longer about the file in front of you, but the one you carry inside. It's not only detectives who experience this. Anyone who looks for truth ends up facing themselves. Therapists, journalists, scientists, all of them begin by studying the world and end by studying the lens they're looking through. That's the quiet rule of inquiry. What you seek defines you. The pattern of your curiosity reveals your private puzzle. Picture a woman investigating art forgery. Her job is to tell real from fake, truth from imitation. After years of work, she notices that the fakes draw her in more than the originals. She realizes she's built a life on imitation too. Polished professionalism, careful neutrality. She's surrounded by truth, but drawn to lies because they feel familiar. The case of forgery becomes a mirror for her own life. The cases that solve you don't announce themselves. They start like any other puzzle, full of data and method. Then, somewhere in the quiet hours of review, you notice the evidence sounds like memory. You stop chasing answers and start listening to what the pursuit itself is saying. Some mysteries end when the facts align. Others end when you recognize yourself in the pattern you've been tracing. That's when the magnifying glass turns. The scene doesn't change, you do. A detective learns to listen to what isn't said. The spaces between words, the pauses between actions, the gaps between clues, that's where truth tends to hide. It's not the footprints that matter most, but the space between them. The silence tells you who hesitated, who changed direction, who decided to stop walking altogether. You can measure distance, but meaning lives in the intervals. In a typical investigation, everyone rushes to the visible. The evidence bag, a fingerprint, the security footage. These things are solid, measurable, and safe to talk about. But a good detective knows that facts don't exist in isolation. They form a rhythm. Break that rhythm, and the pattern starts to hum. The hum is what you follow. Imagine a trail in the woods. You see a set of footprints leading toward a clearing. At first, they're evenly spaced, confident steps, steady pace. Then, halfway through, the spacing changes. The prints grow closer. The heel marks fade, as if the person started moving slower, quieter. Something made them cautious. You don't need a confession to know fear entered the story there. The pause between steps told you everything. The same principle applies in conversation. In interviews, people reveal more in their hesitations than in their sentences. Someone says, "I was at home that night." They say it fast, clean, rehearsed. Then you ask, "Was anyone with you?" The answer comes slower. Their eyes move before their words do. The silence swells. That's the moment the story starts to speak for itself. You don't interrupt it. You let the quiet expand until it fills the room. Most lies collapse under their own stillness. Detectives call this reading the negative space. It's the same skill artists use when sketching. They don't draw the object, they draw the space around it. You do the same when you read behavior. You don't look only at what's there. You study what should be there but isn't. The missing detail, the skipped explanation, the question avoided. These absences map intention better than any piece of evidence. In one case, a young man reported his roommate missing. His statement was detailed, almost too detailed. He listed the times, the clothes, even the last song the roommate played. The detective thanked him, then asked a simple question. "When did you last see him smile?" The man paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough. He said, "Oh, I don't remember." That gap, that small emptiness, told more than the entire statement. Later, the investigation revealed that he'd been the one who hurt him. It wasn't the words that betrayed him. It was the space between them. Even the physical scene speaks this way. A room tells a story through its arrangement. A chair pulled back from the table, but not pushed in again. A door open halfway. A clock stopped at the wrong hour. Each of these details speaks of interruption, something half-finished. You don't need to know exactly what happened to sense that something changed mid-motion. The silence of the object holds tension. That same silence exists in people. A mother avoids mentioning her son's name after a crime. A witness remembers everything except one critical detail. A colleague tells a story 3 times, each with the same omission. What's missing is a voice trying to stay quiet. You don't chase it, you wait. Gaps reveal themselves when they're ready. There's a rhythm to truth. It doesn't flow smoothly, it catches on rough edges. Detectives learn to feel that rhythm. In interviews, you might ask 5 questions in a row, and the first 4 sound natural. The 5th makes the tone shift, the shoulders tense, the breathing slow. That's your map. What's unsaid lives right there in the body's pause. The same applies beyond police work. In ordinary life, people hide meaning in the spaces between words. A friend says, "It's fine." Their tone is flat. Their eyes drift away. The silence after "fine" stretches too long. They're not lying to you. They're protecting themselves. Most of us do the same. We fill silence with noise to keep our true thoughts from escaping. But the quiet always leaks through. Every detective learns that truth doesn't shout. It hums under the surface. You find it in the unfinished coffee on the counter, in the unanswered message, in the hesitation before saying a name. The pattern of what's missing becomes louder than what's present. You begin to sense intention like pressure in the air. There's a case often told in training sessions. A man claims his wife disappeared overnight. He says she left a note, a simple line, "I need space." Everything looks consistent. The handwriting checks out. The note's paper matches the notebook on the kitchen counter. But the detective notices something off. The indentation marks from the pen don't match the words. The pressure dips halfway through the sentence, as if the writer hesitated or someone guided their hand. That hesitation became the center of the case. The silence inside a single line of ink revealed an entire hidden story. Listening to silence is a discipline. It requires patience, not aggression. You can't demand the truth. You have to wait for it to breathe. The same is true when dealing with your own thoughts. There are clues you ignore, choices you justify, questions you never ask. The mind leaves its own blank spaces. Between what you say and what you mean lies the sound of what you're avoiding. In every investigation, there's a moment when the trail goes cold. The footprints end, the witnesses forget, the evidence loses clarity. That's when the good detectives keep walking anyway, not because they see something, but because they feel the outline of what's missing. Every step forward is guided by silence, the space between footsteps where understanding begins to take shape. The truth rarely arrives in a shout or confession. It arrives softly, in the gap between two sounds, in the pause after a sentence, in the hesitation before someone breathes again. You listen, steady and still, and realize that what's unsaid between the clues has been speaking the loudest all along. Every investigation begins with time. The question isn't just who or how, but when. Time gives shape to cause and effect. It arranges chaos into sequence. Without it, a story falls apart. Yet time, for all its precision, is the most unreliable witness a detective ever meets. It doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the same story twice. It bends with memory, fear, guilt, and chance. The missing hour in a case isn't always an oversight. Sometimes it's the moment the truth slips between what happened and what people can stand to remember. Detectives talk about the window. It's the gap between the last confirmed fact and the first discovered clue. That window is where the mystery lives. Say a man leaves a bar at midnight and his car is found at dawn. 6 hours. No witnesses, no cameras, no messages sent. Those hours are missing. You can reconstruct movement, search routes, pull records, but what you're really chasing is time itself, and time refuses to stay still. A veteran investigator once said, "Every suspect tells time differently." He was right. Ask 3 people what they did between 10 and 11 p.m., and you'll get 3 versions, all true in their own way, none exact. One will measure time by tasks. I washed the dishes, made a call. Another will measure it by emotion. I was worried, waiting, restless. A third won't remember the hour at all. They'll fill the space with guesswork. Time folds around the mind's need for coherence. What we forget, we smooth over. What we regret, we stretch out. There was a case involving a woman found unconscious in her apartment. No sign of break-in. Her neighbors swore he heard a fall around 9:30. The paramedics logged arrival at 10:05. Simple timeline, except the woman's watch stopped at 8:48. The oven clock blinked 9:12. And her phone records ended at 9:57. 4 different clocks. 4 versions of truth. Each machine told a slightly different story about the same moment. When the detective pieced it together, the gap, that missing hour, turned out to be deliberate. The suspect had tampered with the clocks to confuse the sequence, to make the truth blur. Time had become the weapon. But not every missing hour is a trick. Sometimes it's the brain's way of surviving. People under shock lose track of time. Victims misremember when things began or ended. Trauma compresses minutes into seconds or stretches them into days. You can't cross-examine that. You can only learn to read its pattern. A detective listens to time not as a machine, but as a language. In interviews, it's common to hear phrases like, "It all happened so fast," or, "I don't know, it felt longer." Those aren't evasions. They're confessions of how fragile time becomes under stress. The mind can't record reality in order. It saves fragments, and those fragments shuffle every time they're recalled. That's why witness statements conflict even when no one is lying. Each person is testifying to their version of time's distortion. There was another case, a train station stabbing. Security cameras covered the whole platform, but the footage was incomplete. One camera looped every 60 minutes, overwriting itself. Another ran 30 seconds behind. A third froze for 4 minutes when the lights flickered. The suspect crossed through all 3 frames, but the sequence couldn't align. To reconstruct the event, the detective had to build a new timeline, one where seconds overlapped and repeated. When the final playback synced, the truth emerged. The suspect wasn't running away. He was running toward someone. The missing minutes had turned guilt into misunderstanding. Time's misdirection almost destroyed a life. Even technology can't control time's distortions. Body cams skip frames. Timestamps drift. Hard drives mislabel sequences when they reboot. You end up with perfect evidence that refuses to line up. In the courtroom, the defense uses that gap like a crowbar. If the video says 2:14 and the witness says 2:17, which do you believe? The answer is neither. You believe the space between. Detectives call this temporal noise. It's the static created when facts collide with perception. Every case has it. A husband says he arrived home at 8 o'clock. The neighbor saw his car at 8:20. The phone logs a call at 8:11. The truth sits somewhere inside that static. Not a single number, but a rhythm. Good investigators don't fixate on the timestamp. They look for alignment. When emotion, action, and environment click together, that's where the missing hour hides. Time also exposes motive. People who lie about time rarely lie for no reason. Shifting an event by 10 minutes can hide opportunity, guilt, or fear. A woman says she left the party at 11, but her rideshare record shows 10:43. Those 17 minutes aren't random. They're the space she doesn't want examined. Maybe she argued with someone. Maybe she saw something. Either way, the missing time reveals pressure. Sometimes, detectives find themselves haunted by their own missing hours. Long nights blur into weeks. You forget when you last slept or ate. The case consumes you, and time bends around obsession. You promise yourself one more hour, then another, until the clock loses meaning. The job teaches you that time isn't a straight line. It's a loop that folds you inside it. That realization makes the missing hour feel less like an exception and more like a mirror. Everyone lives with pieces of time they can't account for. The argument you can't remember clearly. The morning that vanished into routine. The moment you realized something had changed and couldn't say when. Time never lies, but it edits. It hides behind human memory, behind digital glitches, behind fear. Each person reconstructs it to survive the story they're in. When detectives talk about the timeline, they're not just plotting movement. They're mapping how reality fractures under pressure. The missing hour is never just about where someone was. It's about what they couldn't face while they were there. And so, in every case, time remains the quiet witness. It's always present, always recording, but never consistent. It keeps the secrets of everyone it touches. When the story ends, time tells its version too. One that doesn't match anyone else's. One that hums beneath every record and report, reminding you that the truth doesn't just live in what happened, but in how long it took for someone to admit it. Thought. Every detective knows the danger of a false trail. It doesn't appear as a mistake. It looks perfect, logical, convincing, tidy. It fits together so well that you stop questioning it. That's why it works. The problem isn't the evidence, it's the mind's need for closure. The human brain hates uncertainty. It will build a story out of fragments just to feel settled. That instinct solves small puzzles, but ruins big ones. In investigation, as in life, the hardest thing to resist is the urge to finish the picture before all the pieces are found. A false trail doesn't always come from deception. Sometimes it forms naturally, out of coincidence or chaos. A dropped glove, a smudge on a door, a phone call at the wrong time. Each can pull focus away from what matters. The detective's task is to pause before belief sets in. Once belief takes root, it becomes its own evidence. You start seeing what fits the story you've built and ignoring what doesn't. That's how good investigators get fooled. They stop observing and start confirming. Take a case of a warehouse break-in. The night guard swears he saw a man in a red jacket running from the scene. The cameras show a blur of red moving fast across the lot. A red jacket is found in a dumpster 2 blocks away. It feels like alignment: witness, footage, object. But when the detective checks the jacket, it's dry. The night had been pouring rain. It couldn't have been worn that night. The jacket belonged to someone else entirely, discarded days before. The red blur on the camera, a tail light from a passing car reflected on wet concrete. Everything matched until it didn't. The false trail existed only because everyone wanted the story to be simple. The mind builds stories faster than reason can test them. Detectives call this narrative lock. Once you've decided what you think happened, your perception tightens around that version. Every new clue either supports it or feels irrelevant. Breaking that lock takes humility, the willingness to admit that certainty might be the enemy. Even emotion can create a false trail. A detective grows close to a witness, believes their fear, trusts their version. Empathy clouds distance. You want to believe the person in front of you more than the facts on the table. The trail feels human, which makes it harder to abandon. But feelings, like footprints, can lead in circles. One veteran investigator used to say, "Compassion helps you see motive, but it can also make you blind to deceit." He wasn't cynical, just careful. The false trail often starts with one small assumption. You take a single clue and let it decide the shape of the entire story. A note written in haste looks like a confession, but it's really an apology. A missing object looks stolen, but it was simply misplaced. The difference between those interpretations seems obvious after you know the truth, but before that, they both fit. The detective's discipline is learning to pause before fit turns into fact. There's an old case taught in training programs, the Ashfield letters. Over several months, the police received anonymous notes about a supposed murder. The letters gave locations, names, and even times. Every lead checked out halfway, then collapsed. The handwriting changed slightly in each letter, as if written by multiple people. Eventually, the department realized that the writer wasn't part of a conspiracy or a crime at all. He was a lonely man who had inserted himself into unsolved cases to feel useful. His lies built a labyrinth so detailed that the real investigators became lost inside it. The false trail had no villain, just a vacuum that needed filling. False trails don't just exist in evidence, they live inside the detective. The hunger for answers is powerful. After weeks of staring at photos, reports, and interviews, you start seeing patterns that may not exist. You imagine meaning where there's only noise. Your fatigue begins to talk, and it sounds persuasive. You convince yourself that the case is close to resolution because you need it to be. The mind becomes its own suspect, planting clues it later believes. You see this outside investigation too. People build false trails in relationships, in work, in memory. They assign motive where there's confusion, closure where there's absence. Someone doesn't call back, and we invent stories of rejection. A friend grows distant, and we fill the silence with imagined explanations. Each theory gives temporary comfort, but it also buries the real reason deeper. We chase clarity even when clarity isn't possible. The false trail preys on that instinct. It feeds on impatience. Detectives who move too fast fall for coincidences that slow ones would dismiss. The job rewards those who can live inside uncertainty longer than is comfortable. The best investigators don't crave answers, they crave accuracy. That means walking past the obvious path and checking the ground no one else thought to look at. In forensics, there's a phrase, transfer evidence. It means that every contact leaves a trace, a fingerprint on glass, a fiber on cloth. The same is true for thought. Every false assumption leaves residue. You can clean it up, but a little always remains. That's why even after a case closes, detectives sometimes look back and wonder if they followed the right scent. The mind doesn't let go easily once it believes it's solved something. There was a detective who spent years chasing a pattern of burglaries across 3 cities. The timing, the methods, even the types of locks picked were identical. He built a detailed profile, a single suspect, meticulous and patient. He finally found a man who matched perfectly. The man confessed within an hour of interrogation. Case closed. Months later, another burglary occurred hundreds of miles away. Same pattern, same precision, different culprit. The detective realized both men had read the same online manual on lockpicking. The pattern was real, but the connection wasn't. The hunger to solve had created a shadow to match the crime. The false trail doesn't trick you by being loud. It whispers. It tells you that the story makes sense now, that you can rest. It offers the comfort of an ending. That's why it's dangerous. The truth rarely arrives clean or complete. It lives in the quiet space you walk past on your way to certainty. Sometimes what misleads you most isn't the lie on the ground. It's the need inside you to stop searching. Detective work depends on seeing. Every case begins with a light, a clue, a statement, a moment of clarity. But too much light can be as dangerous as none at all. Illumination promises truth, yet it also creates shadows. It draws the eye toward what's visible and convinces you that what you see is the whole story. A detective learns quickly that clarity can deceive. The brighter something looks, the more you should ask what it's hiding. A rookie once said, "I just follow the evidence." It sounded responsible, even noble. But evidence, like light, only shows part of what exists. It highlights what's there and erases what's just beyond reach. When you shine a flashlight down an alley, your focus narrows, the center glows, the edges disappear. If you're not careful, you mistake what's illuminated for what's true. The human mind loves what it can see. It forgets that truth often waits just outside the beam. There was a case one summer, a robbery gone wrong. A store clerk was found injured after closing time. The cameras caught everything clearly. A man in a dark jacket, a knife, a quick struggle. The footage looked like the whole answer. But one detective felt uneasy. The lighting near the door was harsh, throwing deep shadows on the floor. When they slowed the video frame by frame, something shifted. The suspect's knife never touched the clerk. The man had dropped it early. And the clerk's wound came from shattered glass. The glare from a single bulb had turned a reflection into a blade. The camera showed light, not truth. That's how it happens, not through lies, but through confidence in what appears obvious. Illumination gives comfort. It makes you feel in control. You think, I can see everything now. That feeling can blind more thoroughly than darkness ever could. In interrogation rooms, light plays its own tricks. The lamp on the table isn't there for atmosphere. It's strategy. It focuses attention, builds pressure, makes time stretch. But sometimes, the detective feels the effect too. You start believing that truth will show itself under enough exposure that if you just turn up the brightness, ask one more question, press one more detail, the lie will melt away. It doesn't work like that. Some truths shrink from light because they're not ready to be seen. Forcing them out too soon distorts them. People under scrutiny react to light instinctively. They squint, they shift, they try to escape it. You can see guilt in those movements, but you can also see fear, or shame, or fatigue. Not everyone hides because they're lying. Some hide because they've been looked at too harshly for too long. A detective who mistakes discomfort for deceit chases the wrong suspect. You have to learn when to turn the light down. In older precincts, detectives used to carry flashlights with narrow beams, not the wide LED kind. The narrow ones forced you to move the light slowly, to let the darkness fill the gaps. That rhythm mattered. You didn't flood the scene, you swept it. The human eye needs contrast to make sense of depth. Floodlight erases texture. In the same way, a case overexposed by certainty loses its shape. When everything looks clear, it's usually because you've stopped seeing the rough edges. A detective once told me about his first mistake. He was investigating a missing child. The neighborhood had rallied. Posters, flyers, interviews. Everyone pointed to one man, a quiet neighbor who lived alone. He matched every description the community feared. The detective focused on him. The spotlight of suspicion grew bright. Then, a week later, the child was found safe in another city. She'd run away to meet her mother's sister. The neighbor had nothing to do with it. The detective learned then that light can be cruel. It not only blinds you, it burns the innocent standing inside it. This isn't just a lesson for police work. People flood their own minds with too much light all the time. They chase insight so urgently that they stop noticing what the search itself distorts. You can overanalyze a moment until the feeling inside it dies. You can question a friend's silence until the relationship collapses under suspicion. Sometimes darkness, or at least dimness, protects meaning. It gives it space to breathe. Even truth has its timing. Under harsh light, it can look smaller than it is. Think of how a crime scene looks at night, tense, uncertain, alive with questions. By morning, sunlight exposes every detail. Broken glass, blood, ash. You think you understand it better, but what you've gained in visibility, you've lost in mystery. The scene becomes a collection of facts, not a moment that once breathed. You need both, the dark and the light, to see what really happened. Detectives often work in pairs for this reason. One handles the data, the other watches the spaces in between. One shines the light, the other listens for what hides in its glare. Together, they balance illumination and restraint. Alone, either would get lost, one in the dark, the other in the brightness. Light reveals patterns, but it also creates them. A single bulb can turn dust into stars, shadows into shapes that seem deliberate. The mind starts drawing conclusions before the evidence earns them. That's how false certainty begins, with something that only looks like clarity. The most disciplined investigators never trust the first thing they see. They step back, turn the light aside, and ask what exists when the glare fades. Illumination is seductive. It offers speed and confidence, but in an alley, or in a case, or in the mind, too much of it can blind. The detective learns to use the light as a tool, not a truth. You carry it low, aim it slow, and remember that every time you flood the darkness, you also erase something you didn't mean to lose. Every detective loves a clear puzzle, a fixed number of pieces, a frame to contain them, and a picture that waits patiently to appear. But real cases never work that way. The edges blur, the pieces shift. Evidence changes with each witness, each report, each new discovery. You start thinking you're building something complete, then realize the border you trusted doesn't exist. The puzzle with no edge isn't a flaw in the work. It's the work itself. In detective terms, this happens when a case refuses to stay still. A timeline keeps bending. A statement contradicts itself. A motive that made sense yesterday collapses under new facts today. You move forward, but the shape of the mystery changes as you move. It's like trying to assemble a jigsaw made of smoke. You can't force it into form. You can only keep noticing how it shifts. There was a case years ago, a small town disappearance. The story began simple. A man didn't come home after work. His truck was found near a river, door open, keys inside. Everyone assumed the same thing: an accident, a fall, a tragic end. For a week, the search teams dragged the water. Nothing. Then a witness came forward, saying they saw him miles away, walking down a road that led out of town. The puzzle redrew itself. The family clung to hope. 2 days later, new evidence surfaced. His wallet mailed to his wife with no return address. The postmark came from another state. The edges of the story had vanished. Detectives have a term for this: open contours. It means a case that resists boundaries. The facts exist, but they refuse to hold together. When that happens, the first instinct is to tighten control, to draw a border around what you think you know. But control is an illusion. The harder you press, the more the pieces distort. You end up protecting a version of the puzzle that no longer fits reality. The better approach is patience. You start with what's solid, even if it's small: a fingerprint, a timestamp, a pattern of behavior. You place it down without demanding it explain everything. Then you wait for the next piece to shift into place. The puzzle builds itself at its own pace. The detective's task is to keep showing up long enough to see the new outlines appear. Sometimes, the pieces change because people change their stories. Memory isn't fixed. It molds itself around fear, guilt, and self-preservation. A witness says they saw a blue car, then later insists it was green. You could accuse them of lying, or you could recognize that memory isn't a photograph. It's a narrative that rewrites itself every time it's told. The puzzle with no edge is what human truth looks like: living, uncertain, self-editing. A detective once compared it to walking through fog with a flashlight. You can only see a few feet ahead. Each step reveals more, but it also hides what you just passed. You can't see the whole picture, only what's in front of you. That frustrates rookies. They want closure. They want the corners filled in. But the longer you work, the more you accept that closure is a luxury. Most cases end with gaps that never fill. You learn to live with unanswered questions. This isn't defeatism. It's accuracy. The world doesn't arrange itself neatly for our understanding. A confession doesn't always mean guilt. A motive doesn't always explain an action. The same event looks different from every angle. A detective's job isn't to create perfect order, but to find enough truth for the story to stand. Enough edges to hold the shape, even if the full frame is missing. There's a kind of humility in that work. You stop expecting the puzzle to please you. You stop thinking that truth exists to be discovered like treasure. You start treating it as something you build carefully, piece by piece, knowing it may never be whole. The reward isn't completion, it's comprehension, even if temporary. In one investigation, a detective spent months chasing leads about a string of break-ins. Every clue contradicted another. The suspect's footprints matched 2 different shoe sizes. The stolen items didn't match any clear motive. Sometimes cash, sometimes photos, sometimes nothing. Then, one night, the detective noticed that every house targeted had recently sold. The suspect wasn't stealing, he was returning. Old tenants leaving mementos, hiding them back where they once lived. The puzzle's shape had been emotional, not criminal. Once that was clear, the pieces stopped shifting. The case hadn't changed, the perspective had. That's what makes edgeless puzzles so demanding. They test not just logic, but ego. You have to give up the idea that you're in control. The moment you declare, "I know what this is," the puzzle changes again. You can only stay alert, responsive, open to revision. In many ways, that's what thinking itself is, a slow investigation into uncertainty. Even in everyday life, this truth holds. People build stories about themselves that keep changing shape. You think you've understood someone, their motives, their fears, their past. Then they act in a way that doesn't fit. You scramble to redraw the borders. The same happens with yourself. One day you're sure of what you want. The next, the edges move. The pieces of identity never stop rearranging. Detectives call it drift, the way meaning slides over time. The key isn't to stop it, but to follow it. When the puzzle has no edge, the work becomes less about solving and more about seeing clearly, even inside the shifting. You look at the pieces, not for what they once were, but for what they're becoming. You learn to hold understanding loosely, to trace new outlines as they appear. The puzzle with no edge isn't broken, it's alive. The pieces breathe, change shape, and sometimes refuse to fit. You start where you can, with the smallest corner that feels real, and build outward, knowing that the border will always move before you reach it. Every crime begins with a story. It's told before the act, shaped during it, and rewritten after. The first lie isn't spoken aloud, it's drafted in thought, built out of need. A person tells themselves a version of events they can live with. That version becomes the one they offer to the world. Every story protects someone. Sometimes it shields the guilty. Sometimes it shields the fragile. Even the innocent edit the truth to make it survivable. A detective's work isn't only about facts, it's about drafts. You read each account the way you'd read handwriting, looking for pressure, hesitation, and erasure marks. What's written and what's withheld both matter. The ink tells one story. The spaces between the words tell another. In one case, a man claimed he'd been home the night of a robbery. His written statement was neat, exact, almost rehearsed. He described every minute from dinner to midnight. He even listed what he'd watched on television. The report read like a diary, too clean. The detective noticed the rhythm, no stumbles, no uncertainty. Real memory wanders. People forget details, repeat themselves, pause to think. Perfect memory is almost always a script. Later, surveillance footage showed the man had left his house for 10 minutes. He hadn't stolen anything. He'd only gone to meet someone who asked for help moving boxes. He lied not to hide guilt, but to avoid involvement. His story was an alibi written in good faith, protecting his peace rather than concealing a crime. That's what makes truth complicated. Everyone writes to defend something: reputation, comfort, or self-image. The guilty use words to create distance. The innocent use them to stay whole. A detective's challenge is to tell which kind of protection is at play. You can't assume a lie means guilt. Sometimes it means fear. Statements, reports, and testimonies are all forms of authorship. Even when dictated aloud, they follow the logic of writing. People choose words like punctuation, soft where they want forgiveness, sharp where they need control. A suspect might say, "I didn't mean for it to happen." That phrasing shifts blame from intent to accident. Another might say, "It happened so fast," compressing time to escape responsibility. Each sentence is a small act of editing. The story is the shield. Detectives learn to see where the ink thickens. In handwritten notes, pressure shows emotion. The heavier the line, the stronger the feeling beneath it. In conversation, the same thing appears in repetition. A person repeats what they most want believed. I wasn't there. I didn't see anything. I swear I didn't know. Those lines are the bold print of speech. You trace them back to what they're trying to cover. In one interview, a woman described finding her brother's body after what she called an accident. Her voice was calm, her sentences orderly. But when the detective asked about the hours before his death, she shifted into fragments. He said, I think he said something about leaving. The transcript showed hesitation marks, dashes, pauses, crossed-out phrases. The ink betrayed what the voice tried to hide. She hadn't killed him, but she knew he'd planned to take his own life and hadn't stopped him. Her story wasn't about crime. It was about protection, of memory, of guilt, of love. Detective work often feels like literary criticism. You read drafts of people's lives. You look for redactions and revisions. A confession written too neatly might be rehearsed. A rambling statement might contain the one true line buried in noise. The job isn't to punish the storyteller. It's to understand the reason the story had to exist at all. Every courtroom runs on narratives. The prosecution tells one version. The defense tells another. Both are written to protect, not just the accused or the victim, but the idea of fairness itself. The jury listens not for poetry, but for consistency. Yet even they are swayed by tone, by character, by the invisible ink of persuasion. In the end, justice depends on which story feels truer, not which one is true. That's why detectives take notes by hand, even in the age of screens. Ink slows thought. It forces you to see the shape of the sentence as it forms. You learn to hear the rhythm of deception, to feel when words flow too smoothly. The act of writing mirrors the act of lying. Both require choice, and choice is where truth leaves fingerprints. Even outside an investigation, people build alibis. They say they're busy when they're lonely. They claim to have moved on when they haven't. They rewrite the past to make it fit the person they've become. It isn't malicious, it's survival. The line between storytelling and self-defense blurs until no one can tell which came first. A veteran detective once said, "Everyone lies. The question is what the lie protects." That's the compass of the job. Lies are evidence of care, for oneself, for someone else, for the image of a world that still makes sense. The detective doesn't just expose them, they interpret them. Each falsehood is a clue to what the person values most. There was a confession once, written in blue ink on a diner napkin. The suspect slid it across the table during questioning. It read, "I took the blame because he couldn't survive it." Later, they found out he was her son. She'd signed a statement admitting to a theft he'd committed. The stolen item was small, a watch, sentimental, worthless to anyone else. The mother's alibi wasn't for herself. It was a kind of love letter written in denial. Even when they cleared her, she kept saying, "It was still my fault." That's the truth behind every written defense, every verbal explanation, every story told under pressure. Whether in ink, memory, or silence, people write to protect what they can't bear to lose. A detective's job isn't only to find who's lying, but to understand who they're trying to save. Every word is a shield, every sentence is an alibi, and every story, even the truest one, hides someone beneath its ink. Every detective hits a case that turns inward. You start by studying others, their motives, lies, and habits, until one day, the same patterns start looking back at you. The suspect across the table stops being a stranger. They answer your questions the way you might. Their reasoning makes too much sense. The investigation tilts, and you realize the line between pursuer and pursued is thinner than it looks. A mirror case doesn't announce itself. It begins like any other. You gather evidence, interview witnesses, check timelines, But as the facts build, they start to echo. The motive feels familiar. The mistakes resemble your own. You recognize the logic behind a lie because it's one you've used in another form. What you're really seeing is reflection. The truth that no investigator escapes the same human flaws they hunt in others. There was a detective once who prided himself on reading people. He said he could spot guilt in the eyes, hear deceit in the pauses. Then he took a case about a hit and run. The driver had fled, leaving a victim alive but badly injured. The suspect, when caught, said he panicked. He hadn't meant to run. He just couldn't face what he'd done. The detective didn't believe him. "A decent man stops," he said. Months later, the detective clipped a cyclist with his own car on a dark road. The man fell, but stood up waving. Still, the detective kept driving for half a mile before turning back. He told himself he needed to find a safe place to stop, but deep down, he knew it was panic. The next morning, the suspect's words replayed in his mind. He stopped seeing a criminal. He saw himself. That's what reflection does. It blurs certainty. You spend your life drawing lines between right and wrong, only to find those lines move when you step too close. The mirror suspect isn't about guilt in the legal sense. It's about recognition. The people you investigate become pieces of your own map. Their flaws reveal your blind spots. Their justifications mirror your private logic. A case file is supposed to be objective. Statements, evidence, analysis. But every detective writes with bias, even unconsciously. You decide what to highlight, what to skip, whose voice deserves trust. Those choices come from experience, and experience comes from your own story. The detective who distrusts emotion has likely been betrayed. The one who forgives too quickly may still be trying to forgive themselves. Each decision reflects something inward. The mirror suspect hides behind every solved case, not in the evidence, but in the person assembling it. You can see this reflection in interrogation rooms. A detective accuses someone of avoidance, and the suspect stays silent. The detective grows angry, not because the silence is suspicious, but because it's familiar. They recognize the same silence they use when cornered in their own life, in arguments, in grief, in guilt. The mirror doesn't show a face, it shows a pattern. It tells you that the act of seeing another's flaw often exposes your own. There was another case, a forgery ring run by a woman who forged documents for people desperate to start over. New names, new lives. The lead detective became obsessed with her. He told himself it was professional interest, but it was something else. He admired her control, her ability to erase mistakes with ink. His own life was a series of unfinished starts. Marriages ended, partners lost, promises half kept. When she finally confessed, she said, "You don't want me in prison. You want to understand how I did it." She was right. The case wasn't about her crime anymore. It was about his need to see how someone could rebuild without guilt. A mirror suspect had been in the room from the start. Detective work trains you to distrust reflection. Mirrors distort. They flip left and right, turning truth backward. But they also reveal what light misses. The danger isn't in looking, it's in believing the reflection is complete. When you see yourself in a suspect, you risk sympathy clouding judgment. When you refuse to see yourself at all, you risk arrogance. The balance sits somewhere in between, knowing that every person you question is a version of what you could have been, under slightly different conditions. Even outside the field, the mirror follows. People investigate themselves the way detectives work a case. You build timelines, assign blame, write reports in your head about who you've been and why. The same impulse that drives an investigator to understand drives every person who's ever asked, why did I do that? Or how did I get here? The culprit, the victim, the witness, they all live inside you. The case file is your own history. A detective once told a rookie, "Don't chase the face, chase the pattern." He meant that human behavior repeats itself, even across different people. But what he didn't say was that your own pattern is part of the evidence too. The mirror suspect teaches you that solving others' mysteries won't save you from your own. The better you get at recognizing motive, the harder it becomes to ignore your own reflection in it. Every story you untangle leaves residue, empathy, judgment, fear. Those feelings stick. Over time, you start to question whether your insight is skill or projection. When a detective says, "I understand why they did it," what they often mean is, "I know what it would take for me to do the same." The realization is uncomfortable but useful. It keeps you human. The mirror suspect isn't a ghost or metaphorical twin. It's the version of you that reacts to the same pressures as the people you study. It's the self that could justify anything, given the right mix of need and fear. You can't arrest that version, and you can't absolve it either. You can only acknowledge it, the reflection staring back from every closed case file, every confession, every truth that cuts too close to home. Every fire leaves two stories. One is made of ash, and the other is made of smoke. The ash tells you what burned. The smoke tells you why. In detective work, motive is the smoke, the part that moves, hides, twists through air. It blurs sight before it clears it. You can see the shape of it, but never hold it. Every illusion, every deception begins with that first spark, something small catching flame, something emotional turned into action. By the time the smoke rises, the truth underneath is already hard to see. Investigators know that most crimes don't start with greed or hate. They start with heat, embarrassment, pride, panic, desire. These are the sparks that ignite the story before it's even a story. Once it catches, the person begins to cover the glow, to hide what they've done. They build explanations, they rearrange events, they rewrite time. That's when the illusion begins. The smoke isn't just the lie, it's the effort to make the lie breathable. There was a warehouse fire once that looked like arson. The insurance report said accidental wiring failure, but the pattern of the burn told a different tale. The flames had moved in straight lines, accelerant poured deliberately, fire following intention. The owner denied it. He looked tired, almost calm as he spoke. "I've lost everything," he said. The detective believed him, until they checked the man's bank records. The business had been dying for years. The fire wasn't about money, it was about release. He'd built a prison of debt, and the only way out was through destruction. When he lit the match, it wasn't rage, it was relief. Smoke became motive, and the illusion of disaster became a chosen ending. That's what makes motive so slippery. It never looks the same up close as it does from afar. On paper, it's simple: revenge, profit, fear. But in the room, it's tangled. People don't commit crimes for one reason. They act because several reasons collide at once. The fire doesn't start from one flame. It starts from friction. Detectives spend long nights tracing that friction. They look for the point where the emotion became movement. You can't find it in a fingerprint or a footprint. You find it in the spaces between decisions, the moment before a door was opened, before a call was made, before a lie was told. That's where motive hides. It burns quietly there, leaving traces no one notices until the smoke fills the air. A young detective once asked his mentor, "How do you know when someone's lying?" The mentor said, "You don't look for the lie. You look for what they're protecting." Every illusion defends something: dignity, control, belonging. The smoke rises to draw attention away from what still burns at the center. When you understand what's being protected, you understand the motive. In one interview, a woman accused of fraud broke down after hours of questioning. The numbers didn't add up. The documents were forged. The evidence pointed straight to her. But her reason wasn't greed. She'd been covering for her sister, who had taken the money first. "I thought I could fix it," she said. "I thought if I bought time, no one would get hurt." The lie was the smoke, but the fire was love twisted by panic. Every good investigator learns to tell the difference between a crime of want and a crime of care. Both burn, but the light they give off is different. The metaphor of fire fits because fire consumes without hesitation. It changes everything it touches, not just objects, but meaning. The same act can look different depending on who lights the match. A man burns evidence to destroy guilt. Another burns it to protect someone else. The result is the same, ashes, but the smoke smells different. The detective learns to follow the scent, not just the flame. Motive is the hardest part of any case to prove. Evidence answers how. Motive answers why. Without the why, the picture stays flat. You can prove an action happened, but you can't understand it until you know what the person was burning for. Sometimes it's simple survival. Sometimes it's pride so old it's turned to fuel. People think of crime as rebellion, but often it's confession, a way of saying something they couldn't put into words. Smoke is communication in disguise. Even outside investigation, motive burns through every choice. People light small fires all the time. A sharp word, a door slammed, a decision they know will hurt someone. They tell themselves it's reasoned, justified, but underneath there's always an ember: insecurity, envy, exhaustion. The smoke that follows is the justification. I had to. They made me. It wasn't my fault. We build our illusions the same way criminals build alibis, to make the heat bearable. A detective once stood over the ruins of a burned-out building and said, "Fire doesn't lie, but people do about what started it." He meant that destruction is honest. It tells you something was too heavy to carry. The illusion, the smoke, is what people create to make the destruction seem accidental. The same is true for moral collapse. People say things just happened, but something always struck the match. Every investigation, at its core, is about distinguishing fire from fog. The fog confuses. It makes you chase shadows, follow reflections, lose your bearings. The fire clarifies. It shows the human shape behind the act, small, frightened, and trying to survive. That's why detectives learn to read smoke patterns in the air as carefully as they read prints on glass. You can't understand a crime without understanding what someone was trying to burn away. Sometimes the most revealing clue isn't in what was destroyed, but in what survived the fire. A single photograph left untouched, a letter that wasn't burned, an object too sentimental to destroy. Those remnants speak of intention. They tell you what mattered even when everything else was turning to ash. Smoke hides that truth for a while, but when it clears, what remains is motive, the thing that made the flame worth the risk. Every illusion starts with something burning: fear, shame, desire, or hope. The smoke is just the cover story that rises after. A detective learns to breathe through it, eyes half shut, waiting for the air to clear enough to see what was sacrificed to keep the illusion alive. A detective knows that confession doesn't always come as speech. The guilty talk with their hands, with their posture, with the small choices they make when they think no one's watching. Words can be rehearsed, but silence can't. Guilt leaks out through pauses, gestures, and the way a person rearranges themselves around the truth. The body always speaks first. In interrogation rooms, detectives wait for silence the way fishermen wait for a tug. After the questions stop, After the story runs out of shape, there's a moment when the air tightens. The suspect sits still, looks down, breathes differently. It's not an admission, but it's not innocence either. It's the weight of truth pressing through skin. They're not ready to say it, but their body has already spoken. There was a case once, a hit and run on a rural road. The driver denied everything. He claimed he'd been home all night. His car showed a fresh dent, but he said it came from a shopping cart at the grocery store. The detective didn't argue. He just asked the man to walk him through his evening again, step by step. The man's voice stayed steady until the detective mentioned the sound, the moment of impact. The man went quiet, his jaw clenched, his shoulders sagged. He whispered, "That sound doesn't leave you." It wasn't a confession in words, but it was enough. Guilt had spoken in tone and tremor. People believe they can hide behind denial. They think that if they keep their story straight, they can protect themselves. But guilt isn't logical. It sits beneath language. It shows itself in how someone can't meet your eye, or how they repeat one sentence as if saying it enough times will make it real. You don't need to force them to talk. You just need to listen to what their silence says. In interviews, detectives look for micro-expressions. A blink too slow, a smile that vanishes before it finishes, a sigh that doesn't match the moment. These details sound small, but they tell the emotional truth. One suspect might laugh while describing a tragic event. Another might show calm when describing violence. Neither reaction fits the surface. Guilt bends behavior out of rhythm. The words and the body fall out of sync. That's the silent confession. The hardest confessions aren't the ones that break down in tears. They're the ones that never make it to speech. A detective once investigated a missing child. The stepfather claimed she'd run away. He gave interviews to the press, pleaded for help, spoke with perfect composure. But every time the child's name came up, he referred to her in the past tense. She was a bright kid, he'd say. She loved to draw. No one corrected him, but everyone heard it. The truth was buried in grammar. When the body was found weeks later, the tense had been the confession all along. Guilt carries weight. You can see it physically. A slump in posture, a slower walk, a tone that loses its edges. It's not always remorse. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Keeping a lie standing upright takes effort. The longer someone carries it, the heavier it gets. Even without words, the fatigue becomes visible. The eyes sink, the breath shortens, the energy fades. The detective doesn't rush that process. Time does the work. Silence deepens until the person collapses under it. There's another kind of silent confession, one that happens long after the investigation ends. The person never admits anything, but they start living differently. They move houses. They stop driving. They quit their job. They talk about new beginnings, but avoid the word guilt. Their actions confess what their mouth won't. They spend their life trying to balance an invisible scale. Detectives often say guilt leaves fingerprints on routine. Someone returns to the scene. Someone keeps the victim's photo hidden in a drawer. Someone avoids certain streets. The mind can erase memory, but the body keeps the map. A person's habits become their testimony. Even when they think they've moved on, guilt writes itself into the daily rhythm. When they eat, when they sleep, when they look in the mirror. A veteran investigator once said, "The first confession is always the eyes." He meant that people stop looking at what hurts. They'll talk freely about everything around the event, but avoid the moment itself. They look down, away, anywhere but at the truth. You can't fake where your gaze goes. The eyes remember what the mind tries to forget. The same language of guilt appears outside police work. You can see it in ordinary life. a friend who avoids a topic, a parent who apologizes through action instead of words, a child who hides broken glass instead of saying sorry. Silence becomes a kind of punctuation, the pause that means more than the sentence. Guilt is universal, only its causes differ. The detective learns to stay patient. You don't dig for a confession, you wait for it to surface. Pressure can force words, but not honesty. Silence, on the other hand, allows truth to breathe. People fill silence with the sound of themselves when they're innocent. The guilty let it stretch too long. The difference is instinctual. You feel it before you can explain it. There was a confession once that never reached paper. A man accused of arson sat through 3 hours of questioning. He denied everything, then asked for a glass of water. When it arrived, he stared at the steam rising from it. "Funny thing about fire," he said quietly. "You can't always tell if it's still burning." He set the glass down and asked for a lawyer. He never spoke about it again. The case went unsolved, but everyone in the room knew the truth. The confession had already happened, not in words, but in the way he couldn't look away from the smoke. That's the nature of guilt. It speaks through stillness, through the tightening of breath, through the sentence that stops halfway. It doesn't need a statement, a signature, or a witness. It only needs a moment when silence weighs more than denial. The detective doesn't listen for what's said. He listens for what hangs in the air after. Because guilt, when it finally finds a voice, doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just falls quiet. Every mystery begins as a tangle. The detective's job is to find one loose thread and follow it until the pattern reveals itself. The comfort of logic. It promises that every knot can be undone if you're patient, precise, and disciplined. But there's a risk in that faith. Pull too hard, and even the truth can come apart. A case built on reason can collapse under the weight of too much certainty. The thread that guides you toward understanding can also lead you past it. Logic is the tool detectives trust most. It's steady, clean, unemotional. It doesn't rely on instinct or luck, but logic has limits. It works only when the pieces you're examining are honest reflections of reality. If the evidence is flawed, if the timeline has cracks, if a single assumption is wrong, logic doesn't correct it, it amplifies it. A mistake at the start becomes a conclusion at the end. That's how the truth unravels. There was a case once, a burglary turned homicide. The detective began with solid reasoning. The back door was broken, the lock forced. Footprints led away from the scene toward a nearby alley. The prints matched a man known for petty theft in the neighborhood. He'd been arrested before for break-ins. Everything pointed cleanly toward him. The detective followed the thread, building a case around each connection. Motive, opportunity, method, it all fit. But it fit too perfectly. When they finally questioned the suspect, he produced an alibi, a hospital admission form from the night of the crime. The logic had been flawless. The starting point had been false. The footprints belonged to a paramedic who'd arrived before the scene was secured. The truth hadn't been missing. It had been misread. That's how logic works. It follows patterns, even when the pattern itself is wrong. A good detective learns not to confuse coherence with truth. A story can make perfect sense and still be untrue. That's why the best investigators keep some doubt alive, even when the reasoning feels complete. They know that pulling harder doesn't always reveal more. Sometimes it tears the fabric. In detective work, this is called thread fatigue. It's what happens when an investigator becomes too attached to a single theory. They start bending facts to fit their hypothesis instead of letting the facts reshape it. It's easy to fall into. You want answers. You want the case to make sense. You follow the thread, tug after tug, until the whole thing tightens into a story that feels right. Then one day, you realize it's only a story. Logic doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because it's human. It depends on interpretation. A detective builds a chain of reasoning, but every link comes from a choice. What to include, what to ignore, what to assume. Even the most rational mind has bias. When emotion hides behind reason, it calls itself conviction. That's when the pull becomes dangerous. A young investigator once asked an older one how to know when to stop chasing a theory. The older detective said, "When you start trying to prove it instead of test it." That's the line between investigation and obsession. Logic works best when it's flexible. It should bend, not snap. The moment it hardens, it stops seeing what's in front of it. In one cold case, a detective spent years pursuing a man he believed had killed his wife. Every clue seemed to point to him: missing phone records, late-night calls, vague witnesses. But when DNA testing advanced years later, the results excluded him completely. The man had been innocent. The detective's reasoning had been sound, but built on a faulty premise, an assumption about motive that had never been tested. He'd pulled the thread so tightly it strangled the truth. This problem doesn't belong only to detectives. It happens everywhere logic meets uncertainty. A scientist interprets data through a hypothesis. A journalist builds a timeline around a source. A person reconstructs their past from memory. We all tug on the thread of reason to make chaos seem organized. But reality is rarely linear. It frays, loops, and doubles back. Pulling too hard can turn understanding into illusion. In investigation, patience replaces force. You don't yank the thread, you tease it. You check tension before you pull again. You ask whether the thread you're holding still connects to the original fabric. When logic leads you forward, you pause to see if emotion is pushing from behind. The best detectives know when to loosen their grip. They understand that a thread left slack can still hold the truth together. Logic often creates the illusion of clarity. A confession appears to seal the case. A motive seems airtight. The evidence aligns neatly. But the more perfect the pattern, the more carefully you must inspect it. Real life doesn't arrange itself in straight lines. The world leaves rough edges, inconsistencies, and contradictions. When everything fits too easily, it's time to ask what's missing. There's a quiet scene in every long investigation. The detective alone in the office at night. Case file open, cigarette burning down, walls covered in maps and notes. The logic looks beautiful from a distance. Every thread connects, every arrow points somewhere. But up close, you see the gaps. The line between cause and effect starts to wobble. You begin to question whether the story holds because it's true, or because you've held it too tightly. The detective sighs, rubs his temples, and erases a line. That small act, letting go of certainty, is what saves the case. Logic isn't a straight path, it's a weave. You move back and forth between evidence and doubt, between what you think you know and what might still be hiding. Pulling too hard unravels that weave. It turns understanding into threadbare conviction. The art of investigation isn't in following logic to its end. It's in knowing when to stop before the whole pattern disappears in your hands. Every detective knows that solving a case begins with understanding motive. You can trace an action backward only if you know what drove it forward. The same rule applies outside the precinct. Every choice a person makes leaves evidence, a pattern, a reason, a trail. Yet when you turn that same lens inward, the logic begins to blur. You can analyze others with precision, but try to examine your own motives, and the lines shift. What looks like truth at one angle becomes excuse at another. The self is the case that never quite closes. People believe they know their own intentions. They say, "I did it because I wanted to help," or "I was angry," or "I had no choice." Those statements sound solid, but under them lies guesswork. Motives rarely come labeled. They live in layers: survival beneath pride, fear beneath kindness, shame beneath ambition. Even when you speak with honesty, you're reconstructing events from memory, and memory edits for comfort. The story you tell about why you acted often protects you from seeing the real reason you did. A detective once said that every crime has two versions: the one the suspect remembers, and the one the evidence shows. The same is true of our lives. We keep evidence, text messages, photos, habits, but we build stories around them that fit who we believe we are. The problem is that the evidence doesn't always match the narrative. You may tell yourself you left a job because it wasn't fulfilling, but the real file might show fear of failure. You may claim you ended a friendship out of self-respect, but the records might reveal hurt pride. Like any investigator, you have to learn to separate testimony from trace. In the field, detectives rely on distance to see clearly. They stand outside the story, but self-investigation denies you that luxury. You are both the suspect and the examiner, both witness and judge. Each question you ask of yourself is shaped by what you want the answer to be. You cross-examine your own mind, but it knows how to hide evidence. That's why understanding your own intentions feels like chasing a shadow with a flashlight. Every time you turn toward it, it moves behind you. There was a case once involving a veteran investigator who grew obsessed with a missing person report. A woman had vanished after leaving work, and weeks of searching turned up nothing. He took it personally. His colleagues said he was too close, too invested. He worked the case long after it went cold. Years later, they found her alive, living under a new name. She had left willingly to escape a life that felt suffocating. The detective never forgave himself for not seeing it. But his mistake wasn't about missed evidence. It was about projection. He wasn't chasing her story. He was chasing his own fear of disappearing. The line between professional duty and personal motive had blurred. What he called dedication had been desperation to solve something inside himself. That's the danger of self-analysis. Every motive you uncover leads to another. You think you've found the root. Need for control, fear of rejection, longing for safety, and then you realize it's only another layer. You can't interrogate yourself into clarity because the mind defends itself while pretending to cooperate. You lie to yourself in small, polite ways. You call selfishness self-care. You call avoidance patience. You build an alibi for every emotion that feels inconvenient. The result is an endless file of partial truths. Detectives use a term called contaminated evidence. It means something in the process interfered with purity. A fingerprint smudged, a witness influenced, a clue mishandled. Self-reflection is full of that. Your memories are contaminated by hindsight. Your reasons shift to match the outcome. You rewrite old motives to make the past more bearable. When you revisit a failure, you say, "I didn't really want it anyway." When you recall a mistake, you say, "I did my best with what I knew." The investigation keeps circling, never reaching a clean confession. Still, the work matters. To understand yourself, you have to approach the case as a detective would, with patience, attention, and restraint. You gather evidence from patterns, not promises. What do you repeat? What do you avoid? What keeps you awake when everything else is quiet? Those are your fingerprints. A detective doesn't assume guilt. They trace behavior. The same method applies inward. Don't decide who you are. Observe what you do. There's an old saying in interrogation rooms: silence is a statement. When a suspect stops talking, it's not because they have nothing to say. It's because they're afraid of what might slip out. In self-examination, silence works the same way. The subjects you avoid, the questions you won't ask, the moments you refuse to revisit, those are your confessions. They tell you what you already know but aren't ready to face. A man once kept a notebook of every decision he regretted. Each entry began with, "I thought I was doing the right thing." Over time, the notebook revealed a pattern. He always acted from fear of loss of approval, stability, control. His good intentions were often defenses against vulnerability. He wasn't cruel or dishonest, just unaware of what guided him. He'd spent years solving problems without realizing he was part of each one. The notebook became his case file. The suspect was himself. Understanding your own intentions doesn't mean finding guilt. It means tracing the path between what you believed you were doing and what you actually did. It means accepting that reason is often a disguise for emotion. You might say you acted out of logic, but the real evidence points to fear, envy, or longing. Like any detective, you learn to read the signs: the hesitation before a decision, the relief after a lie, the story you tell yourself before you fall asleep. The hardest truth is that you'll never close the file completely. The unsolved self isn't a failure of insight. It's the nature of being both investigator and subject. Each discovery changes the one who's observing, and that change starts the mystery again. You keep finding fragments, motives half buried, intentions rewritten, truths that fade under new light. You follow them anyway, not to convict yourself, but to understand the person still writing the report. Every investigation begins with what's visible: a broken window, a missing item, a name scribbled on a receipt. The detective walks through a scene, cataloging what anyone could see, but looking for what most people wouldn't. The obvious details tell the story everyone believes. The overlooked ones tell the truth. The challenge is that the obvious speaks louder. It demands attention, fills space, insists on meaning. The subtle waits quietly, patient and certain that someone will eventually notice. In detective work, the phrase "beneath the obvious" describes the second layer of observation, the space where assumptions live. You learn early that what's most visible is often staged, whether by the culprit or by circumstance. The knife left on the counter, the letter torn in half, the timestamp that's too clear. All these are signals meant to direct your gaze. The real clue, the one that shifts the whole story, usually hides under something mundane. There was a case years ago involving a small-town break-in. The thief had forced entry, ransacked a house, and left in a hurry. Jewelry and cash were gone, but so was an old photo album. At first glance, it made no sense. The detective noted the missing items and focused on the valuables. But a week later, he noticed a small strip of tape residue on the wall, where a picture frame had hung. The thief hadn't taken the album for its worth. He'd taken it to hide the photo missing from the frame, an image of himself with the homeowner. The motive wasn't theft, it was erasure. What looked like greed was guilt trying to disappear. That's the nature of perception. The eye prefers patterns that confirm what it expects. You see what fits your story first, not what contradicts it. A detective's discipline is to question the obvious, to assume it's incomplete. That discipline isn't cynicism, it's curiosity refined by failure. Every time an investigator follows a false lead, they learn that visibility and truth are rarely the same. The same principle applies beyond police work. People overlook what's uncomfortable to see in others, in themselves, in the world around them. You might hear someone's words but miss their silence. You might notice a friend's smile but ignore the exhaustion behind it. The surface keeps you safe. Depth asks for vulnerability. It asks you to admit that you missed something important. In one investigation, a detective worked a domestic homicide that looked straightforward. The husband confessed. The evidence lined up. Case closed. But something felt wrong. The detective couldn't explain it, just a faint resistance in the facts. He revisited the crime scene and noticed the cat's food bowl was full. It had been days since the death. Someone had been feeding the cat. When questioned again, the husband broke down. He hadn't acted alone. The confession was a cover for his son, who'd been protecting his mother during a violent argument. The smallest detail, one most would never think twice about, exposed the lie beneath the story everyone accepted. Look where no one else is looking. It's the quiet rule of investigation. But it takes more than attention. It takes humility. You have to accept that the obvious might be wrong, that the story that fits neatly is often the least reliable one. Ego clouds vision faster than emotion. A detective who wants to be right more than they want to be thorough becomes blind. Certainty narrows the field of vision until the truth slips past unnoticed. The same blindness shows up in daily life. People cling to first impressions because they make sense quickly. The coworker who's distant must be arrogant. The neighbor who keeps to himself must be hiding something. The child who lies must be defiant. But beneath the surface, other explanations live. Fear, grief, insecurity, or simply exhaustion. The obvious answer feels efficient. The real answer takes patience. A good investigator slows down their seeing. They don't assume a mark on the floor is dirt. They ask why it's there. They don't take a witness's words as fact. They study what the witness avoided. They walk through the same space twice, first as anyone would, then as someone who refuses to believe the first version of the story. Each pass reveals more. Each layer peels away the illusion of completeness. In one cold case, a woman vanished after attending a late-night party. The police found her shoes neatly placed by the door. Everyone assumed she'd left willingly. For years, that detail closed the file. It looked conclusive. But when a new detective reopened the case, he questioned the assumption. He asked why anyone would take off their shoes before leaving a crowded house in winter. That single question reframed everything. The shoes weren't a sign of departure. They were a sign she never left at all. The truth had been sitting beneath the obvious, waiting for someone to doubt it. The habit of looking beneath the surface is more than skill. It's temperament. It requires comfort with ambiguity, the willingness to say, "I don't know yet." Most people rush to fill that gap with certainty because uncertainty feels like failure. But uncertainty is the detective's workspace. It's where real seeing happens. There's a moment during every long investigation when the evidence runs cold and the detective feels lost. The map of facts stops making sense. The pattern falls apart. That's when the temptation to settle for the obvious becomes strongest. But the best investigators pause instead. They step back and let the details breathe. They stop looking for what's missing and start re-seeing what's already there. More often than not, the thing they overlooked is the thing that's been staring back the entire time. What we overlook doesn't vanish. It waits. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, sometimes in memory, sometimes in conscience. The act of looking again isn't about finding what's new. It's about noticing what's been there all along, steady and quiet, waiting for our attention to sharpen enough to see it. Every detective learns early that memory is unreliable. You can have 5 witnesses to the same event and end up with 5 versions of the truth. They'll agree on what happened in broad strokes: the sound of a shot, the color of a jacket, the shape of fear. But the details never align. It's not because they're lying. It's because memory isn't a recording. It's an interpretation. The mind edits for comfort, and it edits without permission. In an interrogation room, people often say, "I remember it clearly." That statement means very little. What they remember clearly is the story they've built around what happened. Trauma, guilt, and shock all rewrite memory. Even calm moments change under repetition. Every time a person tells the same story, it shifts slightly to match the version they wish were true. The longer time passes, the more the mind cleans up the mess. The sharp edges blur until the memory fits the person's sense of self. There was a case involving a robbery outside a gas station. The victim insisted the suspect wore a red hoodie. The surveillance footage later showed the man in dark green. When the detective asked the witness about it, she became defensive. "I know what I saw," she said. But she didn't. She'd built an image that helped her stay certain in a frightening experience. The red hoodie wasn't a mistake. It was a symbol. It made the event easier to categorize, easier to talk about. Red meant danger. Green didn't. Her mind gave her a color that matched her fear. That's what memory does. It doesn't preserve moments. It protects you from them. It edits, rearranges, and substitutes. It replaces unbearable detail with something manageable. The detective's job is to read those edits. A good investigator doesn't treat the witness as a recorder, but as a storyteller. Every pause, every contradiction, every missing piece is part of the story of survival. A veteran detective once said, "The brain doesn't forget the truth, it buries it." That's not poetic, it's practical. People who witness violence or loss often experience selective amnesia. They can recall the moments before and after, but not the core of the event. It's a defense mechanism, a way to stay functional. The problem is that those gaps can change the direction of a case. If you treat memory as fact instead of evidence, it can mislead you faster than any lie. In one investigation, a child testified that she'd seen her father strike her mother the night she disappeared. Years later, as an adult, she recanted. She said she'd filled in details based on what she'd been told, not what she'd seen. At the time, she wanted to help. She wanted the grown-ups to stop asking. Her memory had formed around suggestion, not sight. The truth wasn't erased, it was overwritten. Detectives call this memory contamination. It happens when outside information mixes with real recollection. News reports, conversations, or even dreams can become indistinguishable from experience. The witness believes the composite as fully as if they lived it. When they say, "I remember," what they mean is, "This is the version I've come to believe." It's not deceit, it's adaptation. Even investigators fall victim to it. Over long careers, they remember cases in ways that suit closure. A detective might recall a solved case as straightforward, even if it wasn't. They might forget the moments of doubt or the lucky breaks that led to resolution. Memory edits for pride as much as for pain. You remember the version of yourself that can keep working. In daily life, the same pattern plays out. People tell stories about themselves that omit the hardest parts. You remember your childhood as warmer or colder than it was. You recall arguments as justified or meaningless depending on who you are now. You forget what you need to forget to keep living with yourself. Each person becomes their own unreliable witness. The testimony isn't false, it's incomplete. A detective investigating a witness learns to look for what's missing, not what's said. If someone skips over a detail too smoothly, that's where to pause. If they repeat a moment often, That's where emotion hides. You listen to what the mind is trying to protect. The editing reveals more than the words do. In one case, a man claimed not to remember the night his brother drowned. He could recall the lake, the weather, the drive home, but not the moment of the fall. The gap was too clean. The detective didn't press. Months later, during a quiet interview, the man began to shake. "I told him to jump," he said. "I told him it would be funny." He hadn't lied. His mind had sealed the memory shut until he could face it. The forgetfulness wasn't deceit, it was mercy. That's why detectives don't chase memory as much as they trace behavior. The body remembers what the mind edits. A trembling hand, a glance that avoids a certain direction, a tone that falters. These are the real archives. The witness might say, "I don't remember," but their body will tell you what the mind can't. You learn to read silence like handwriting. Even outside investigations, this truth holds. People cling to edited memories because they serve as protection against guilt, regret, or grief. You tell yourself you tried your best. You tell yourself they forgave you. You trim the parts that would break you if left intact. In that way, forgetting becomes a form of survival. A detective once described memory as the most convincing liar in the room. It lies with purpose, not to deceive others, but to keep you standing. The witness who forgot isn't careless or dishonest. They're human. Their silence, their confusion, their shifting recall, all of it is evidence of how hard the mind works to make life bearable. The truth doesn't disappear. It just waits under layers of edits, patient, quiet, and certain that one day someone will look closely enough to see what's still there. Every case begins with a timeline. The detective builds it like scaffolding, one fact at a time. Who was where and when? What happened first? What followed? What ended it all? Time seems solid, the one element that doesn't lie. But anyone who's worked long enough in the field knows better. Time bends. It hides truth in the gaps between moments. It rearranges itself to protect what it doesn't want found. The clock, like the people who read it, can lie. Detectives use the phrase anchor points to mark the fixed times in an investigation. A camera timestamp, a phone call, a receipt. Each piece holds the story still for a second. But between those seconds, anything can happen. People vanish into minutes. Alibis stretch or shrink depending on memory. A suspect says, "I was home by 9," and means it. But the surveillance camera says he didn't arrive until 10. Both statements are true in their own way. One emotional, one mechanical. The mind measures time by feeling, not by clockwork. There was a case where a man swore he saw his neighbor leave a building at midnight. The security footage showed her leaving 2 hours earlier. When asked again, he insisted, "It was 12. I looked right at the clock." The detective visited his apartment. The wall clock was slow by exactly 120 minutes. The man hadn't lied. The clock had. The story of the crime had shifted because of one misplaced gear. The timeline bent, and truth bent with it. That's how time conspires. It doesn't deceive directly. It lets perception do the work. Fatigue, fear, and shock alter how long a moment feels. A minute can stretch into an hour when you're scared. An entire night can collapse into one blink when you're guilty. When detectives reconstruct events, they don't just measure time in numbers. They measure it in perception. How did the night feel to the people inside it? What emotions distorted the minutes? In one interrogation, a suspect said he was only in the house a few minutes. The coroner's report proved the crime took at least 20, but in his memory, those minutes had vanished under adrenaline. To him, the event was brief, almost instantaneous. The clock in his mind had sped up to spare him from recognizing what he'd done. The body can handle guilt only in small doses. Time, in its mercy, compresses it. Even physical clocks betray certainty. Cameras glitch. Digital files record the wrong hour because of daylight savings or faulty settings. Power outages freeze time mid-event. Detectives once found an old wristwatch stopped at 11:47 beside a body. It looked like a clue, a frozen moment of death. But the autopsy revealed the victim died hours later. The watch had simply broken. Everyone had read meaning into coincidence because time gives accidents a sense of purpose. There's an old saying in police work: the timeline is the first suspect. It means you never trust it completely. Every timestamp, every recollection, every synchronized watch is an accessory to the crime until proven innocent. When the timeline collapses, the story reveals itself. But it takes patience to see how it falls apart. In another case, a man was accused of arson. He claimed he left the warehouse at 8:15 p.m. His phone records supported him. A call made at 8:16 from across town. It looked airtight, but later, the detective noticed the phone's internal clock was 10 minutes fast. When recalibrated, the call had happened at 8:06, minutes before the fire started, not after. The lie hadn't come from the suspect. It had come from the device that marked time. Machines, like people, preserve illusions when they can. Time protects secrets by fragmenting memory. Witnesses forget the order of events. Victims lose minutes before impact. Even detectives, reviewing their own notes, find the hours blur. The work stretches and folds on itself. You leave the office at midnight and feel it's still morning. When time refuses to stay linear, certainty becomes impossible. All you have left are fragments to arrange and rearrange until they form something that feels true. People outside the job imagine time as a clear thread, one event leading neatly to another. But inside the job, it feels more like a loop. You return to the same moment again and again, each time seeing it slightly differently. The victim's last steps, the suspect's hesitation, the sound before silence. Every review alters the order. Time doesn't move. It folds inward, hiding the truth behind repetition. A detective once said that time lies the way witnesses do, not maliciously, but for protection. It hides what people can't handle seeing all at once. In cases involving trauma, time fractures. Victims recall events out of sequence because the brain prioritizes safety, not chronology. It records emotion before fact. It felt like it lasted forever, someone might say. And in a sense, it did. The moment never stops replaying inside them. Even in ordinary life, time edits truth. We shorten painful years into a sentence. It was a hard time. We stretch brief joy into nostalgia that lasts decades. We remember days that never happened exactly as we recall them. Our personal clocks lie to us kindly. Rearrange the timeline so we can keep going. For a detective, the hardest part isn't catching the liar. It's catching the moment when time itself started covering for them. When did the watch stop? When did the witness's memory split? When did minutes turn into myths? These questions matter more than motive because they tell you where the story twisted out of reality. The clock that lied isn't always a machine. Sometimes it's the one ticking inside us, the inner sense that rearranges sequence so pain feels further away. We think of time as neutral, but it's complicit. It protects what we can't bear to confront by moving it out of reach. And when we try to reconstruct it, we find that every second has already been tampered with, not by hands or gears, but by the need to survive the truth. A detective knows that not every lead deserves to be followed. Some clues exist only to waste time. They shine bright, call attention, and lead you down the wrong road. In investigation, they're called red herrings, false trails that mimic truth. Every case has them. They come from witnesses who misremember, from evidence left by coincidence, or from the suspect's careful manipulation. But the most dangerous kind doesn't come from outside the detective. It comes from inside. Emotion can mislead better than any planted clue. A case begins with adrenaline. You want to solve it fast, to restore order, to feel that rush of clarity when chaos breaks into pattern. That urgency is emotion disguised as logic. You think you're reasoning, but you're reacting. A detective chasing answers in anger or empathy is already lost in the fog. The heart makes a convincing map, but it doesn't point north. There was a case where a detective investigated a break-in at a small antique shop. The owner was a kind woman in her 70s who offered him tea during every interview. She insisted her former assistant was to blame. "He's been after me for months," she said. "He wanted my grandfather's watch." Her story sounded sincere. Her voice shook when she spoke about the theft. The detective trusted her too quickly. Weeks later, he found out the assistant had an airtight alibi. He'd been in another city the night of the burglary. The real culprit was the owner's own grandson. She had framed the assistant to protect him. Her trembling voice wasn't proof of innocence. It was guilt disguised as fear. Emotion had done its work. It had distracted the detective long enough to build a false narrative. That's the trick with emotion. It doesn't shout, "Lie." It whispers, "Believe me." Sympathy blinds faster than deceit. When someone cries, you want to comfort them. When someone gets angry, you want to calm them down. Both reactions pull you away from the facts. Detectives learn to let feelings happen in the room without letting them shape the evidence. You listen, but you don't lean in. You observe, but you don't absorb. In one homicide investigation, a grieving husband dominated every interview. He wept, shouted, demanded justice. The detectives hesitated to question him too hard. Grief made him untouchable. They turned their focus elsewhere. Weeks later, forensics found traces of the victim's blood in his car. His grief had been genuine, but not pure. Emotion had hidden motive. The performance wasn't rehearsed, it was survival. A man mourning both his wife and the version of himself that didn't commit the crime. The red herring wasn't planted by strategy. It grew naturally from the chaos of guilt. People imagine lies as deliberate. In truth, many are emotional reflexes. The mind edits facts faster than it realizes, bending them into something bearable. A suspect may not even know they're misleading the investigation. Fear makes them forget. Shame makes them rewrite. A detective's job isn't to suppress empathy, it's to see through it. Emotion explains behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. You have to feel without falling for it. Detectives use the term emotional noise for the interference that clouds an interview. A person's voice cracks, a hand trembles, a tear falls, and your focus shifts from content to tone. You stop hearing the words. Emotional noise distorts rhythm and judgment. You start following feelings instead of facts. The best investigators learn to lower the volume. They wait out the storm until the emotional static fades, then listen to what remains. Even experienced detectives fall into emotional traps. There was one who spent years chasing a serial burglar. The thief left small gifts at every scene: a flower, a handwritten quote, a calling card of sorts. The detective started to see a pattern of arrogance, even romance. He built a profile based on that assumption. But when they finally caught the suspect, it turned out to be a teenage boy stealing for attention, not glory. The so-called poetry had come from greeting cards. The detective's imagination, his need for meaning, had filled in the blanks. He'd mistaken sentiment for substance. Emotion also tricks us outside police work. In daily life, people follow their feelings into conclusions. You might trust someone because they remind you of someone kind. You might doubt them because they remind you of someone who hurt you. Both are emotional shortcuts disguised as intuition. The same happens in self-reflection. You tell yourself you're being logical when you're really protecting yourself from discomfort. A red herring isn't always external. Sometimes it's the thought that feels too right, too fast. In one cold case, a detective reopened a file on a missing woman. The first team had concluded she ran away based on letters she'd written about leaving town. They'd seen despair and taken it at face value. But the new detective noticed the letters were unsigned drafts, never sent. The tone didn't match her behavior in the days before she disappeared. She had made plans for the weekend, bought groceries, and confirmed a shift at work. The emotional evidence, her words on the page, had been persuasive but false. She hadn't planned to vanish. Someone wanted it to look that way. The original team had followed emotion, not probability. Every good investigator develops what they call emotional distance. It's not coldness, it's discipline. You learn to let people's pain move through you without steering you. The trick isn't to turn off empathy, it's to separate it from analysis. You can feel someone's fear and still measure their timeline. You can respect their grief and still check their alibi. Without that separation, every case becomes a mirror for your own feelings. And once you see yourself in the case, you stop seeing the case at all. Emotion is the perfect distraction because it feels like truth. It's vivid, human, undeniable. It commands attention, but it isn't evidence. It's the color that hides the shape underneath. The detective's task, and maybe everyone's task, is to keep looking past the feeling to what's left when the heartbeat quiets and the room goes still. Because what's beneath the emotion often tells the real story, the one that doesn't beg to be believed. Every good lie starts with a plan. It doesn't arrive in panic or chaos. It's constructed piece by piece, layer by layer, like a building designed to stand against inspection. People imagine lies as flimsy, but the best ones are engineered. They have structure, rhythm, and symmetry. They borrow strength from what's true. The blueprint of deception isn't drawn to create fantasy. It's drawn to hide reality inside something that looks believable. A detective learns to see that structure. Lies, like architecture, depend on stability. They need details that support the weight of the story. Too much truth and the lie becomes transparent. Too much invention and it collapses under its own design. The trick for the liar is balance. The trick for the detective is pressure. Push at the right point and the frame shifts. Push too hard or too soon and the liar has time to reinforce it. There was a case where a man claimed his car had been stolen the night before a hit and run. He filed a police report, produced a spare key, and gave a calm account. Everything lined up, the timing, the sequence. even his tone. But the detective noticed something small. The man had mentioned the exact street where the stolen car was later found, before the police had released that information. It was a crack in the design. The lie had been sturdy, but the truth had leaked through a gap the builder hadn't noticed. Lies, no matter how well built, can't seal every seam. The process of lying is mechanical. It begins with motive, moves through structure, and ends with performance. The liar constructs from necessity, to avoid punishment, to protect someone, to preserve a version of self. Once that motive is strong enough, logic becomes a tool, not a guide. Each sentence gets weighed for effect, not accuracy. Each gesture rehearsed until it feels natural. But lies require maintenance. They need constant upkeep. The truth, once spoken, stands alone. The lie must always be tended, adjusted to fit new information, patched where it weakens. Over time, that upkeep becomes exhausting. The cracks widen, the blueprint starts to fail. Detectives call those failures stress points. When someone repeats their story too often, fatigue sets in. They forget which lie replaced which truth. The rhythm falters. The sentences grow longer as they try to fill silence. A lie has a particular sound, too steady, too deliberate. Truth moves differently. It drifts, hesitates, contradicts itself slightly. That imperfection is what makes it real. In one interview, a woman denied forging checks from her employer. Her story was clean. She'd left the company months before, hadn't touched a single file. But the detective asked about her last day. She paused, smiled, and said she remembered packing her things while listening to the radio. It was a small comment, harmless on its own. Later, investigators confirmed the office radio had been removed weeks before she left. That single false detail exposed the entire lie. She'd built her story from remembered fragments, not facts. The truth had slipped through the crack she thought was decoration. Lies rely on predictability. The builder assumes the listener will react a certain way. That sympathy will soften judgment, or that confusion will create doubt. Detectives disrupt that pattern. They ask questions out of order, repeat small details, introduce silence. The silence is important. It breaks the rhythm the liar rehearsed. A lie lives in flow. When that flow stops, anxiety rises. The liar fills the space, and in doing so, exposes the weak parts of their design. Even outside interrogation rooms, people build lies this way. Someone lies about why they missed a meeting, why they left a relationship, why they failed a promise. Each story has a skeleton, a reason that sounds responsible, a setting that feels ordinary. But the truth hides underneath, restless. It shows up in the tone of apology, in the misremembered sequence, in the unnecessary detail. When people lie, they often add too much. They decorate the story to prove sincerity, unaware that the excess gives them away. Detectives often say, "The truth is lazy. It doesn't work to defend itself. It doesn't rehearse. It doesn't remember to match every prior version." That's why truth leaks through lies. It doesn't care about structure. It waits for the lie to collapse. In contrast, deception is ambitious. It tries too hard. You can always feel that strain if you listen long enough. A detective once investigated a man suspected of embezzlement. The man's accounts were meticulous, spreadsheets balanced to the cent. Every question had a prepared answer. The investigation dragged on for months until one day, during a casual conversation, the man mentioned a vacation he'd taken with his family. The same week, the funds disappeared. His expression changed the moment he said it. The detective didn't respond. He didn't need to. The lie had already recognized itself. It stood exposed, unsupported by the very precision that had built it. That's how deception works. It needs to be believed. But belief creates pressure. Each person who accepts the story adds weight to its walls. Eventually, the liar has to choose between maintaining the illusion or breathing freely. The moment of confession isn't about morality. It's about collapse. The structure can't hold. The cracks widen, and the truth, patient, quiet, unbothered, seeps out through every scene. The blueprint of deception is careful work. It uses logic as scaffolding and emotion as mortar. But even the strongest design has flaws. The human mind can't build perfection. It leaves traces, a gesture too still, a timeline too neat, a sentence that sounds rehearsed. Detectives find those traces the way sunlight finds a window crack. They don't force the truth out, they let it escape on its own. Because no matter how elaborate the lie, truth never disappears. It just waits, slipping through the smallest opening, rebuilding itself in the light. In most stories, discovery is loud. The detective bursts through the door, the suspect confesses, the case closes with certainty. But real deduction doesn't work that way. The truth often arrives without noise. It doesn't shout, it waits. You find it not in a single flash of brilliance, but in a small shift of understanding. Something that feels ordinary until it changes everything. The quiet deduction is the moment when chaos starts to make sense, and you realize it's been simple all along. Detective work is full of noise, literal and mental. People talk over each other, theories collide, evidence stacks up without order. Everyone wants to be the first to see the pattern. But the best investigators know when to stop chasing and start listening. Silence is where the story aligns. It's in the pause after the last question, the quiet after a lie, a moment when a detail that once seemed irrelevant finally settles into place. There was a case where a man was found dead in his apartment, the scene arranged to look like suicide. A note sat on the table, written in neat cursive. Every sign pointed one way, but something about the handwriting felt off. The lead detective didn't announce his suspicion. He didn't accuse anyone. He just looked longer. Later, when he compared the loops and spacing to a grocery list the man had written a week earlier, he saw it. The difference wasn't in the words, but in the pressure. The note had been written by someone trying too hard to minute calm. That small observation broke the case open. The revelation didn't come with applause. It came in quiet recognition, a whisper only attention could hear. Quiet deduction depends on patience. You can't force clarity. It arrives when the noise runs out of energy. Detectives call it letting the scene breathe. You look, you take notes, you walk away, and then you return. In that gap, the mind rearranges what it knows. You start to see what doesn't belong. Not through brilliance, but through noticing what stays when the unnecessary fades. The human brain loves noise. It feels safe when things are moving, when problems look active. That's why people talk through confusion instead of thinking through it. But in an interrogation room, silence is a tool. When a detective stops talking, the suspect feels the weight of that quiet. They start to fill it. They explain too much, justify too fast. The truth slips out between their own words. The deduction doesn't come from pressure. It comes from space. In one investigation, a woman claimed she hadn't seen her neighbor the night of a fire. The detective didn't challenge her. He asked a few questions, then sat still. The silence stretched until she looked uncomfortable. Then she said, "Well, I did see her car, but that doesn't mean anything." The detective wrote that down. The case turned on that one sentence. If he had spoken sooner, if he had filled the silence, the detail would have stayed buried. The quiet deduction doesn't demand answers, it invites them. Quiet thinking also applies to self-reflection. Most people mistake noise for progress, the lists, the plans, the endless explaining of what went wrong. But the real understanding often comes when the talking stops. You notice what patterns repeat in your life, what mistakes follow the same rhythm. It's not a dramatic realization, it's subtle, the kind of truth that feels less like discovery and more like remembering something you already knew. In police work, there's a moment after the chaos of an investigation when everything slows. The evidence is logged, the reports are written, and the detective sits with the pieces. No more witness statements, no more theories, just facts laid out in silence. That's when connections form. The mind, freed from urgency, begins to see the geometry of truth, how one small thing links to another. The sound of that realization isn't thunder, it's the soft click of alignment. One case involved a missing child. The entire department searched for days, running through leads that went nowhere. Then, late one night, a detective sat reviewing old reports. He noticed a delivery route listed twice, once correctly, once slightly misspelled. The driver's name was the same, but the addresses didn't line up. The error seemed small, meaningless. But when he traced it, he discovered an abandoned property the driver had access to. The child was found there alive. The breakthrough didn't come from intuition or drama. It came from a quiet, careful moment of seeing what had been overlooked. People expect big moments to look big, but in truth, revelation often disguises itself as routine. You wash a cup, you walk down a hallway, and the answer arrives, not as a flash, but as a soft recognition, where mind stops pushing and the pieces finally fit. In detective work, that moment is sacred. You can't schedule it or explain it. You earn it through attention, not speed. The quiet deduction requires humility. You have to admit you don't know yet. You have to let go of the urge to prove yourself right. In silence, ego has no use. All that matters is observation. When you remove the need for credit, your senses sharpen. You start to notice the tone of a voice, the timing of a pause, the way light hits an object at a specific angle. The world becomes its own teacher. One seasoned investigator described it this way: you don't catch the truth, you notice it catching you. That's what happens in quiet deduction. You think you're chasing clarity, but it's been waiting for you to slow down. When you finally do, it steps forward, calm and certain, as if it's been there all along. In life, as in investigation, most people overlook the quiet clues. They expect truth to make noise, to announce itself with drama. But truth is patient. It doesn't compete with distraction. It just waits to be seen. The quiet deduction is the art of noticing, not forcing. It's the kind of seeing that doesn't demand proof, only presence. The kind that doesn't shout, "Eureka," but instead says, softly, "Of course."